Chapter 1170. Huoshu. Suddenly, a heart-wrenching scream came from afar. Daluan Ruozhen felt like his heart was being pierced by 10,000 arrows as he stared at Wang Chong and Huoshu Huizong, who had been held high in the air. At that moment, his mind was completely blank. It was as if his entire soul had been taken away, and his eyes were extremely gloomy. In the War of the Southwest, the cavalry of the Ngari royal lineage, which had been accumulated for decades, had been completely wiped out on the shores of the Arai, and the entire Ngari royal lineage had been turned into a no-man's land, but Daluan Ruozhen's eyes had never dimmed. When the Tsenpo had imprisoned him in the royal capital's dungeon and forced him to live a life of darkness, Daluan Ruozhen's eyes had never dimmed. When the eagle of the plateau, Dusong Mangpoj, had died on the battlefield, Daluan Ruozhen's eyes had never dimmed, but when Huoshu Huizong had been pierced through by Wang Chong's sword and raised high into the air, the light in Daluan Ruozhen's eyes had vanished, leaving him bereft of life. "Prime Minister, let's go." On the battlefield, the wind was howling, and an anxious shout came from the side. Huoba Senji, leading the remnants of the Mutri Great Cavalry, stared at Daluan Ruozhen's back with concern in his eyes. The Arabs had already been defeated and Qutayba had been killed. There was no reason for Uzun's men to remain here. The Tang people could charge at any moment, so the urgent task at hand was to preserve their forces, flee Talas, and return to Uzun. But at this moment, Daluan Ruozhen was in a daze, staring in Huoshu Huizong's direction as if he hadn't heard a thing. "You guys, hurry over and help Prime Minister onto a warhorse. Immediately withdraw." Huoba Sang's heart was filled with anxiety. He called over 2 Mutri Great Cavalry and immediately ordered, "Yes." 2 Mutri cavalrymen jumped off their horses and hurriedly helped Daluan Ruozhen onto their horses. "Let's go." A moment later, Huoba Senji led Daluan Ruozhen, the remaining Mutri Great Cavalry, and the remaining Uzun cavalry into a cloud of dust as they fled into the distance, not even bothering with the Arabs behind them. As the saying goes, when disaster strikes, everyone flies away. The troops of the Tang dynasty would soon catch up to them. At this time, they could only run for their lives. Huoba Senji and the others were very fast, and in just a short while, they had already run several thousand feet. Abu Muslim couldn't help but give a long sigh, a complicated expression on his face. He knew that the situation was hopeless. "Listen to my orders. There's no need to stop them. All soldiers, retreat at full speed." With the cooperation of the Uzun cavalry, the Arabs might have been able to hold on for a little longer, save as many soldiers as possible, and then return to Samarkand. But the Western Turks had fled, and now even the Uzun cavalry had fled. Only the Arabs were left on the battlefield, and they could only flee. Gallop. The Arab army was like a mountain, tens of thousands of soldiers casting off their armor and madly fleeing to the west. Unlike the last few times, there was no resistance, and this was no longer a strategic retreat. There wasn't even a need to sound the retreat horn. Everyone was madly fleeing for their lives. "Kaio! Kaio!" A loud shout resounded through the sky, and the war drums rumbled incessantly. Gao Xianji, Cheng Qianli, Xiyuan Qing, Wang Yan, Cui Piaoqi, Li Sai, and the others quickly charged out. At almost the same time, the elite armies of the Divine Martial Army, Divine Prison Army, Dragon Stallion Army, Roaring Tiger Army, and Su Hanshan's Ballista Army surged forward, crossing the first defense line and pursuing the fleeing Arabs. Clang. On the battlefield, Wang Chong slowly drew back his sword and put down Huoshu Huizong's corpse. "Someone, take care of Huoshu Huizong's corpse and give him a proper burial." Wang Chong ordered from his horse. Until the very end, Huoshu Huizong had not received a reply from Wang Chong, but when Huoba Senji pulled Daluan Ruozhen away, this renowned general of the southwest of the Uzun Empire, a great general who had once fought against Zhangzhou Jianqiong, finally closed his eyes. As an enemy, Wang Chong had originally been brimming with killing intent, but now that Huoshu Huizong was truly dead, Wang Chong's killing intent had receded, leaving only pure respect for a true great general. Although they were enemies, Huoshu Huizong could still be considered a true soldier. Even in his final moments, he had not been thinking about himself, but the fleeing Daluan Ruozhen. That smile had left a deep impression on Wang Chong. Perhaps this is the best ending for you. As this thought flitted through Wang Chong's mind, he quickly regained his composure and looked into the distance. In that direction, the Arabs and Uzun soldiers were retreating like the tide. Wang Chong's eyes instantly turned sharp. This time, no matter where Abu Muslim fled to, Wang Chong would pursue him to the ends of the earth. He would not give him any time to catch his breath, much less allow him to make a comeback. Hiya! Wang Chong leaped forward, and the white-hoofed shadow let out a long neigh as it took Wang Chong into the air. With a single step, it covered more than 100 feet in pursuit. With Wang Chong's departure, all the forces of the Tang dynasty in Talas were mobilized. Even the nomads of the mercenary tribes of the western regions who had long ago charged back excitedly, gathering up their livestock and charging with the army. It truly is a divine weapon. It truly is a divine weapon. A herdsman from the western regions wearing a white turban was so excited that his entire body was trembling. The great Tang had truly given them a pleasant surprise. Whether it was the ambush of Kataba with the myriad Rakshasa earthen stronghold formation or that final heaven-shaking battle, the Tang dynasty had not leaked any information beforehand, deceiving even their allies. But at this time, no one complained about this. As long as they could defeat Arabia and win this war, that was enough. The war should be carried out by those responsible for the war. Hear my order. Teams 2 and 3, dismantle the steel walls. Team 1, load up all the steel on transport carriages and prepare to follow the army. Zhang Shouji's hair and beard flew in the wind, his elderly eyes bright as snow. After working with Wang Chong so many times, Zhang Shouji was no longer a simple engineer, nor was he completely ignorant of the affairs of war. After several months of stalemate, Zhang Shouji sensed that this pursuit would not easily stop. It would be an unprecedented pursuit, and the steel walls of the city of Talas would play an enormous role in Wang Chong's future battles. Once the city of Talas collapsed, there would be no value in defending this place. The barren land was not even good for grazing cattle. No matter what, this place was no longer worth defending. Given Wang Chong's personality, the defense line was assuredly pushed forward. This was a tacit understanding that had been forged between the two sides for a long time. Kill! With the Wushang cavalry and Tongluo cavalry as the vanguard, the rest of the army in the rear, and the shepherds and craftsmen bringing up the rear, an unprecedented pursuit began from Talas. The army pursued day and night, and even top-class armies like the Divine Prison Army, Divine Martial Army, and Dragon Stallion Army had given up on foot and switched to horses to pursue the Arabs. In normal circumstances, this would have been a major taboo, and it would have been detrimental to the power of these top-class armies, but at a time like this, any sort of tactic was no longer important. This was because all the Arab cavalry had lost their will to fight. For the first time in the East, these fearless Arabs who lived by fighting had encountered an opponent more valiant and skilled in battle. For the first time, they had tasted an unprecedented defeat and defeat. Prime Minister, let's go. The stone bridge is up ahead. As long as we can get past it, we can cut it down and then follow Greater and Lesser Balor back to the Uzun Plateau and escape the pursuit of the Tang people. Hoba Senji anxiously called out. The Tang people's pursuit this time had been far more ferocious than imagined. As they fled from the battlefield of Talas, the roars of the Tang people had never ceased. This time, they had apparently decided that they would not rest until the Uzun and the Arabs were completely exterminated. Hoba Senji had a proud nature, and he had originally come for the sake of the Mutri Great Cavalry and the reputation of all the people of Uzun, but now he didn't even dare to turn his head. The energies of Wang Chong, Gao Xianji, the Black Armored Guard, and Cheng Qianli were like a storm, and no one in all of Uzun could contend against them. Even someone as proud as Dama Trimo had taken up his Buddhist saber and fled with all his might. As for Abu Muslim and Ziyad, because they had been transferring energy to Kataba, they were extremely weak and didn't even have the time to rest or recover. In this state, Uzun and the Arabs no longer had the right to fight with the Tang dynasty. Dian Ersongrong, lead an army to harass the Arabs and slow them down a little. The Tang's attention is completely focused on the Arabs. The longer they are in a state of confusion, the more chance we have to survive. Hua Senji suddenly turned his head and looked at Dian Air. Although Dusong Mengpoj and Huoshu Wuzong had died in battle, the Uzun still had some fresh soldiers. Understood. Upon hearing this, Dian Ersongrong immediately turned his head and led his army in a charge against the Arabs. The Arabs had been stopped by Dian Ersongrong in this charge, and the soldiers in the rear were much slower, creating a scene of utter chaos. In the past, Hua Senji would have never dared to do this, but now that the war had been lost, the two sides were no longer allies. As long as the Prime Minister and himself returned to Uzun, nothing else mattered. Go! Everyone go! Once we cross the stone bridge, immediately cut off this place. Chapter 1171. Prime Minister, let's go. I'll hold the rear for you. Hua Senji turned his head to the rear. The Tang dynasty soldiers were approaching with astonishing speed, the screams of the Arabs echoing through the heavens. Even to the people of Uzun, it was a dreadful sight. If they did not flee, it would soon be their turn. What are you standing around for? Hurry and escort the Prime Minister away. Hua Senji pointed at the two Mutri great cavalry. Hua. Suddenly, a calm and wise voice sounded in his mind, interrupting Hua Senji's order. These two ordinary words made Hua Senji's heart skip a beat, and he had an extremely ill foreboding. For some reason, Hua Senji could sense from Daluan Ruozen's voice that he could see through life and death. Prime Minister, let's talk about this after we get back. Did you two bastards not hear what I said? Hua Senji's eyes widened, and before Daluan Ruozen could finish speaking, he rebuked the two Mutri great cavalry. Hua Senji, let's part ways here. Daluan Ruozen suddenly said as he looked up at Hua Senji from his horse. His voice was abnormally calm amidst the sounds of fighting, so calm that Hua Senji felt uneasy. Prime Minister, what nonsense are you saying? Let's go. Hua Senji's eyes widened as if he had predicted something. Hua, there's no need to say more. More than 100,000 soldiers have died in battle, and the Mutri great cavalry have suffered grievous losses. Someone has to take responsibility for all this. Moreover, Dusong Mengpoj and Huoshu Wuzong have both died here. Even if we return to Uzun, do you think that the Tsenpo will let us go? Daluan Ruozen faintly smiled, his expression growing even calmer. Prime Minister. Hua Senji was stunned. His heart was full of words, but he couldn't utter a single word in front of Daluan Ruozen's simple words. Hua, go. Only if I stay will you be able to survive. My era has ended. In the future, Uzun can only rely on you. Tell the Tsenpo that I have done my best. Daluan Ruozen's gaze seemed to see through everything. He took one last look at Hua Senji, pulled the reins, and immediately turned around. Wang Chong, do you dare to come out and meet me? Daluan Ruozen's loud voice resounded throughout the battlefield. He slapped the back of his horse and quickly disappeared into the surging army. Prime Minister. Behind him, Hua Senji stared blankly at that confident and emotional figure, unable to speak for a long time. At the same time, Daluan Ruozen's words caused the Tang dynasty army pursuing the Arabs to fall into chaos. It's Daluan Ruozen. What other tricks does this bastard want to play? Qianli, take some men and stop him. Mounted on a white warhorse, Gao Xianji immediately noticed Daluan Ruozen galloping over. Gao Xianji was wary of Daluan Ruozen. Although Daluan Ruozen was a purely civil minister, if not for him, this war would never have become so complicated, and the Arabs, Uzun, and Western Turks would never have formed an alliance. In the final battle, when the god avatars of Wang Yan and Cheng Qianli had been destroyed, the entire Tang dynasty had almost collapsed. Gao Xianji was almost certain that Daluan Ruozen had played a significant role in this, and that he had even been the one to devise the entire plan. Although he couldn't think of any tricks Daluan Ruozen could play in these circumstances, Gao Xianji was almost instinctively wary of him. Wait a moment, let me. Suddenly, a voice came from the distance. Wang Chong, riding on the white-hoofed shadow, slowed down as he weaved through the dense army. Shui Qianjun, pass on my order. Have Cui Piaoqi continue the pursuit. As for Daluan Ruozen, leave him to me. Without my order, No one is allowed to touch him. Daluan Ruozen's actions were far too abnormal, but unlike Gao Xianji, Wang Chong did not believe that he could play any tricks at this time. Dusong Mangpoj was dead, Huashu Wuzong was dead, and Wang Chong had even killed Kateba. No matter how clever Daluan Ruozen was, there was nothing he could do to reverse the situation. Following Wang Chong's order, the entire army was thrown into turmoil. Like water crashing into a reef, all the soldiers parted to the sides before encountering Daluan Ruozen. Wang Chong's order was perfectly carried out. The Wushang Cavalry, the Tongluo Cavalry, the Divine Prison Army, the Divine Martial Army, the Ballista Army, all the soldiers acted as if they hadn't seen him, circling around Daluan Ruozen and continuing the pursuit. A portion of the army naturally remained at Wang Chong's side. All of this had been accomplished in the blink of an eye. After successive battles and successive victories, Wang Chong had established an extremely high prestige in the army. Even the Tongluo cavalry who had had some conflicts with Wang Chong chose to obey Wang Chong's orders. Gallop! The hooves of the Highland steed kicked up a cloud of dust as it slowly rode forward with Daluan Ruozen. Before them were piles of corpses, some Arab, some Uzan, and the stench of blood permeated the air. Daluan Ruozen's expression was calm and indifferent, and his body seemed to exude an invisible force that attracted everyone's attention. Yuan Qing, Lu Shi, lead the army and continue the pursuit. I'll stay here and keep an eye on Daluan Ruozen. Gao Xinji frowned. He suddenly stopped and ordered, "Don't worry." The evil emperor and chief of Wushang couldn't help but slightly slow down, frowning as they gazed at the distant Daluan Ruozen. But when they saw Daluan Ruozen's eyes, they seemed to understand something, and their thick brows slowly relaxed as they fell silent. Hiya! As he watched Daluan Ruozen slowly gallop over, Wang Chong's eyes flashed, and he urged his horse forward. As Wang Chong and Daluan Ruozen approached, the surroundings fell silent as countless gazes gathered on them. Even the most ignorant person would have some understanding of the grudge between Wang Chong and Daluan Ruozen, their mortal enemies. In the War of the Southwest, Wang Chong had risen to fame because of Daluan Ruozen, and now, on the distant battlefield of Talas, the two had once more met in a fateful encounter. Gallop! 10 some paces from each other, Wang Chong and Daluan Ruozen both stopped, their eyes meeting in silence. It seemed like only a moment, but it also seemed like countless long centuries. Finally, everyone heard a long sigh. The winner is the king, and the loser is the thief. Wang Chong, you've won this battle. Starting from now, for 10 some years, no one on the continent will be able to compare to you, and no one will be able to contend against the Tang dynasty. Daluan Ruozen suddenly said. The fierce winds blew at his robes, but Daluan Ruozen's heart was in turmoil. You shouldn't have come to this battle in the first place. Wang Chong calmly said. The final result of this battle might have been an accident in Daluan Ruozen's view, but in Wang Chong's view, it was inevitable. Daluan Ruozen had no idea how much effort he had put into this battle, how much preparation he had made. From the moment Wushang had constructed the city, this battle had begun. Daluan Ruozen was fighting a battle he was certain to lose. Heh! Daluan Ruozen only chuckled, his expression indifferent as if he could see through everything. How could I not come? Whether it was for myself or for Uzan, I had to win Talas. But the winner is the king, and the loser is the thief. I've lost, so I have nothing to say. Wang Chong fell silent. Just as Daluan Ruozen had said, the winner is the king, and the loser is the thief. This was a principle that all generals understood and abided by. Although Daluan Ruozen had truly caused him no small amount of trouble, even Wang Chong had to admit that Daluan Ruozen was an opponent worthy of respect. Wang Chong, I've done all I could in this battle. I don't regret losing to you, nor do I have any regrets. I've spent half my life on the battlefield, taking pride in my intelligence and rarely encountering an opponent. Although I'm not very strong, even Zhangzhou Jianqiong has to retreat in front of me. I've spent several decades in the southwest, but I've never achieved anything. Wang Chong, you are the first and only person to have forced me into such a desperate situation. Daluan Ruozen looked at Wang Chong, his eyes devoid of hatred, only pride and pride. Putting aside their countries and standpoints, to be able to encounter a true opponent in his life was, in a sense, a kind of fortune. At the very least, he had no regrets. Wang Chong, can you agree to a request of mine? Daluan Ruozhen suddenly asked. Seeing Wang Chong's slight frown, Daluan Ruozhen faintly smiled and continued. Be at ease. I will no longer be your opponent. Give me Hushu Wuzong's corpse. I'll stay here and do whatever you want to me. I beg of you. As he said the last two words, the smile on Daluan Ruozhen's face slowly receded. He bowed slightly and looked at Wang Chong, a pleading look in his eyes. In that instant, that peerless, masterful, and spirited Uzun minister of wisdom had disappeared. What appeared before Wang Chong was an ordinary, lowly, and insignificant Daluan Ruozhen. Boom! Gao Xianji, Cheng Qianli, Li Sai, and Xue Qianjun were all stunned by this sight. Even Wang Chong's eyes showed a hint of emotion. Everyone heard Daluan Ruozhen's words clearly. No one expected that Daluan Ruozhen would disregard his own life at a time like this for Hushu Wuzong's corpse. What was even more unexpected was that he would lower his head in front of Wang Chong for Hushu Wuzong's corpse. Daluan Ruozhen was proud and conceited. In this world, there was probably no one who could make him lower his head so easily. Even Gao Xianji was far from being able to do so. However, for Hushu Wuzong's corpse, he abandoned his pride and lowered his proud head. Chapter 1172. Can I? Daluan Ruozhen asked again, a hint of pleading in his voice. I've known Hushu Wuzong my whole life, and he's always been by my side. I can't fulfill my promise to him, but at least let me send him back to Uzun and give him a proper burial, okay? Wang Chong looked at the deathly gray in Daluan Ruozhen's eyes, and suddenly he remembered Hushu Wuzong's last words. He let out a long sigh in his heart, and finally urged his horse to retreat. He had fought with Daluan Ruozhen for so long, and faced with this last request, Wang Chong could not refuse. Men, bring Hushu Wuzong's body here. In just a moment, a few cavalrymen of the Tang dynasty, leading a horse with Hushu Wuzong's body on it, galloped from the rear of the army. Marquis. The cavalryman stepped forward and handed Hushu Wuzong's body to Daluan Ruozhen, and quickly retreated. Wang Chong looked at Daluan Ruozhen silently. The latter seemed to have seen nothing and felt nothing. From the moment Hushu Wuzong appeared, his attention was completely attracted. The faint smile on Daluan Ruozhen's lips had disappeared, and he slowly urged his horse forward. His face was always calm, and when he looked at Hushu Wuzong's body on the horse's back, he suddenly revealed a deep sorrow and sorrow. Hushu Wuzong was wearing a fiery red armor. Even in death, his burly body still gave people a feeling of tall and valiant. However, his face was pale, and there was no sign of life in his body. Wang Chong, can you tell me what he said in the end? Daluan Ruozhen raised his head and said. Wang Chong let out a long sigh. Without hiding anything, he told him exactly what Hushu Wuzong had said before he died. At that moment, looking at Hushu Wuzong on horseback, Daluan Ruozhen's body trembled, and two streams of tears flowed down his face. Hushu, I'm sorry. In this battle, I misspoke. Hushu Wuzong lowered his head, his body trembling. The scenes of the past once again flashed before his eyes. On the Uzun Plateau, the young Hushu Wuzong was glaring at him like a tiger cub. I, Hushu Wuzong, am the dragon and tiger of the plateau. Even if it's the Tsenpo's order, I will never bow to a mere scholar like you. So what if you're a dragon and tiger? Dragons, you can't ascend to the heavens. Tigers, you can't enter the earth. You're just an ordinary man of strength, and you can't accomplish anything. What use are you? You. What about you? Did I say something wrong? A mere scholar without the strength to truss a chicken. You can't even defeat my subordinates. What use are you? Do you know how to rule the country and bring peace to the world? Do you know how to devise strategies and decide victory over the world? Do you know how to unite the vertical and horizontal, befriend the distant and attack the nearby? How does Milord plan to revitalize the Uzun Plateau? 30 years. What can't he do? Milord doesn't even have the strength to truss a chicken. I'm afraid that's just wishful thinking. Haha, don't we have you? Huoshu, we've lost again. The Tang dynasty is stronger than we imagined. Are you going to give up? No, I'll never give up. The Uzun Plateau is still too weak. Give me 30 years, and I'll definitely make the Uzun Plateau the strongest existence. Since that's the case, if Prime Minister doesn't mind, let me be your right-hand man for 30 years. Scenes of the past flashed past his eyes like lightning. Looking at Huoshu Wizong's pale corpse, Daluan Ruozen's tears kept flowing. Huoshu, this time, I've harmed you. You and I have known each other for half of our lives. Let me accompany you. The two of you, listen up. Immediately send General Huoshu Wizong's corpse to the plateau. If anything goes wrong, bring his head back. Yes. Two of Daluan Ruozen's loyal guards seemed to realize something. They lowered their heads in unison, their eyes showing a trace of sorrow. Wang Chong, being able to exchange blows with you is the greatest pride of my life. Daluan Ruozen took a deep breath. Looking at Wang Chong, his eyes regained some of their vigor. Don't worry. You won't regret this deal. Daluan Ruozen faintly smiled, once more returning to that energetic and wise minister of the past. Imperial Minister, Senpo, Daluan Ruozen doesn't have the face to see you. In 2 campaigns, 400,000 Uzun cavalry died. Daluan Ruozen can only atone for his sins with death. Before Wang Chong could react, Daluan Ruozen suddenly drew his sword and slashed it across his own neck. In an instant, a fountain of blood spurted into the sky. Daluan Ruozen's expression was calm. He raised his head high and gazed into the depths of the sky, gazing into the distance. Finally, his eyes lost focus and he slowly fell from his horse. As his slender body slowly and heavily fell to the ground, dust rose into the air. At this moment, the entire battlefield seemed to have fallen silent. Gao Xianji, Cheng Qianli, Li Sai, Xue Qianjun, and everyone else were stunned by this sight. The famous minister of the Uzun Empire, the most renowned sage of the Ngari royal lineage, the man who had stood in the way of the tiger of the empire, Zhangqiu Jianqiong, had died in front of everyone in such a tragic manner. Prime Minister. At this moment, on that long and narrow stone bridge far away, Huoba Senji's eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. He suddenly let out a heart-wrenching scream. Wang Chong, one day you will pay the price for today. The Uzun Empire will not lose. One day, I will avenge the Prime Minister and the General. Martha, let me take some men to kill him. The Uzun Empire has lost all its elites, and they don't have Daluan Ruozen or Huoshu Wizong. As long as we launch a surprise attack and catch up to them, there is still a high chance that we can kill Huoba Senji and the soldiers of the Uzun Empire and eliminate all future troubles. A voice suddenly came from behind. Li Sai suddenly took a step forward and looked in the direction of Huoba Senji on the stone bridge with a cold glint in his eyes. At almost the same time, though the king of Gonka said nothing, he also took 2 steps forward. It was obvious that as long as Li Sai moved, the king of Gonka would definitely work with him. Given the strength of the two, there was an extremely high chance that they could kill Huoba Senji. After experiencing so many battles, Wang Chong's prestige in the Tang army had soared like the noon sun, and after his battle with Kateba, no one could compare to him. In this aspect, not even veteran generals like Gao Xianji or Cheng Qianli could compare to him. For Huoba Senji to dare to threaten Wang Chong in front of so many people was simply suicidal. Forget it. Let him do as he pleases. Wang Chong calmly said. This person doesn't have the bravery of Huoshu Wizong or the intelligence of Daluan Ruozen. He's just angry at Daluan Ruozen's death. He's not much of a threat to the Tang dynasty. After saying this, Wang Chong lowered his head to look at Daluan Ruozen's corpse. For some reason, even though he had killed Huoshu Wizong and dealt with the powerful foe that was Daluan Ruozen, Wang Chong felt no joy or excitement. On the contrary, he felt a faint, indescribable sense of loss and sorrow. Pass on my order. Return the corpses of Huoshu Wizong and Daluan Ruozen to Uzun. All the remaining Uzun cavalry, as long as they don't deliberately attack, are to be released. No one is to attack. Wang Chong sighed. Your subordinate will go. Around Wang Chong, whether it was Li Sai, the King Gonka, or any of the other generals, all lowered their heads in submission. Wang Chong waved his hand, and several of his men dismounted. They helped Daluan Ruozen's corpse onto their horses and rode off. By the stone bridge, a group of Uzun soldiers grief-stricken received the corpses of Daluan Ruozen and Huoshu Wuzong. Without another word, they mounted their horses and rode off, quickly vanishing into the distance. Rumble, in an instant, with a loud sound, the long stone bridge in the distance broke at its base, falling heavily into the abyss. Wang Chong silently watched from a distance, saying nothing. "Let's go." Wang Chong took in a deep breath and led his army into the distance. The matter of Uzun had come to an end, but the matter of the Arabs was far from over. No one understood better than Wang Chong just how much of a threat this massive empire on the western border could pose to the Great Tang. If he didn't strike while the iron was hot and completely crush it, he would have to reap the rewards. If he didn't strike while the iron was hot and completely routed them, the Tang dynasty would probably be greeted by hundreds of thousands of Arab soldiers in the coming year. Hiya! The long whips screeched through the air. The army quickly began to move into the distance. A few moments later, Wang Chong's army caught up to Shi Yuanqing, Lu Shi, and the others. The situation was somewhat different from Wang Chong's expectations. Although he had caught up to the army, he did not see Abu Muslim's group. What's going on? Where are Abu Muslim and the Arabs? Wang Chong said with a frown. Lord Marquis, there's a problem. While pursuing Abu Muslim, we were ambushed and attacked by Osman. Lu Shi gasped for breath. Osman? Wang Chong raised an eyebrow in surprise. If he remembered correctly, Osman had been heavily wounded at the very start and had used some sort of Arab blood shield to escape. Of all the Arab generals, he had been the first to withdraw from the battle. Wang Chong had never expected him to appear at a time like this. We've never penetrated deep into Arab territory before, and we don't know if the Arabs have any other reinforcements lying in ambush along the way. After discussing things with Yuanqing, we decided to wait here for Milord to arrive so that we can meet up with him. Lu Shi sternly said, his body bowed. The Tang dynasty's victory was already set in stone, so there was no need for a momentary advance to hand over the fruits of victory to the Arabs. That's fine. Although Abu Muslim and Ziyad have been greatly weakened, a centipede can still be killed. His intelligence and experience are not something you can compare to. Wait for me and Wang Chong to arrive, and then we can move. Gao Xinji said. Wang Chong nodded. He and Gao Xinji were in complete agreement on this point. Let's go. Abu Muslim won't be able to get very far, and he won't have much time to rest. Samarkand isn't far ahead, which is their closest base to Talas in the west. No matter what, we can't give them any time to catch their breath and recruit more soldiers. Chapter 1174. It is better to pursue a cornered enemy with the remaining courage than to seek fame as a tyrant. Abu Muslim and Ziyad had transferred all their energy to the dead Qutayba, and their strength was severely weakened, so they could only choose to flee. If we wait for them to recover, this battle won't be so easy. Let's go. Gao Xinji was even more straightforward than Wang Chong. With a single order, all his soldiers began to rush in the direction of Abu Muslim's retreat. Milord, the Black Forest is up ahead. After passing through the Black Forest, Samarkand is just a few hundred li away. After traveling for several dozen li, a voice suddenly sounded. Banahan was riding on a maroon horse, pointing to the front. Few of Wang Chong's subordinates had ever been to Arabia before, so they didn't know much about the route, but Banahan was different. As the leader of the Ferganan tribe of the western regions, Banahan had made several trips to Samarkand in his youth. Although it had been so long that he couldn't remember the exact route, he still remembered the general location. Cree. As they were speaking, a shrill cry came from the sky. The group of people raised their heads and saw a huge rock eagle spreading its wings in the sky, drawing strange patterns over and over again. After repeating this a few times, it quickly turned around and flew forward in a huge arc. Milord, there's a report from the front. There seems to be a battle taking place in the direction of the Black Forest. On the side, Zhang Ke looked away from the sky, rode his horse forward, and bowed to Wang Chong. The rock eagles trained by Zhang Kei's eagle team all had their own special code words, with different flight paths representing different meanings. The rock eagle just now had said, "There's a battle up ahead." But how is that possible? The Arab territory will soon be up ahead. Other than us, who else can fight with the Arabs? Shi Yuanqing was the first to speak, his eyes filled with shock. There was no need to doubt the strength of the Arabs west of the Tsong Mountains, and almost no faction could contend against them. All the factions that could pose a threat to them had been uprooted long ago. Who else could stop Abu Muslim? Even Gao Xianzhi had a pensive look on his face. Not necessarily. A light flashed in Wang Chong's eyes. He seemed to have thought of something and suddenly said, "Have you forgotten that there is another Khorasani?" As soon as Wang Chong's voice fell, it was like a sudden clap of thunder. Everyone was startled at first, but they quickly revealed a look of understanding. Before this battle, the Khorasani had sent a message expressing their goodwill to the Tang dynasty. The Khorasani had sworn that as long as the Tang dynasty could defeat Abu Muslim and his enormous Arab army at Talas, they would send their strongest cavalry to work with the Tang dynasty to stop the Arabs on their retreat. A swear-in cataphracts. In a flash, the same thought suddenly appeared in everyone's mind. Go! Gao Xianzhi squeezed the horse's abdomen and led the group forward. The 20,000-some great Tang soldiers followed closely behind him, filling the sky as they advanced toward the Black Forest. When the group arrived at the edge of the Black Forest, it only took a moment for a dozen heavily armored cavalrymen to form a neat formation and gallop towards the group. The physique, appearance, and armor of these people were similar to those of the Arabs, but they were also very different. "It's the Khorasani!" Shi Yuanqing and Lu Shi exclaimed in delight. The two of them had personally received the Khorasani when they were lingering at Talas, so they could tell at a glance that the Khorasani were very different from the fierce and warlike Arabs. Great General Wang Chong is up ahead. When the Khorasani was still several hundred paces from the group, a hawk-eyed and high-nosed Khorasani suddenly spoke in the language of the Tang dynasty. "That's me." Wang Chong's eyes flashed as he waved a hand behind him. "Someone, go to the back and invite Wan Shuyang and Sir Yuan over." One of Wang Chong's personal guards quickly left. A few moments later, Wan Shuyang rode up from the rear on a Turkic horse with a glossy white coat. Knowing that the situation was unique, Wan Shuyang and Wang Chong exchanged a few words before stepping forward to converse with the Khorasani cavalry. Although he seemed weak and cultured, when it came to language, Wan Shuyang immediately became high-spirited and brimming with confidence. It was like he had become a different person. Gallop, 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 gallop. In just a moment, Yuan Shusong spurred his horse back to the camp. "Milord, the Khorasani say that they learned of Milord's victory and, in accordance with the oath they made to Milord, attacked the retreating Arab army in the Black Forest and even captured Governor Osman of Cairo. The leader of the Khorasani, Great General Bahram, has sent word that he wishes for Milord to meet with him and discuss how to deal with the Arabs." Wan Shuyang excitedly said. "What?" The Khorasani soldiers were overjoyed. "Wonderful." Only Wang Chong and Gao Xianzhi glanced at each other in surprise. Although the Arab strength had been greatly reduced, their morale at rock bottom, they still had tens of thousands of soldiers, and they also had several top-class armies that possessed considerable strength. This sort of army was not something that any faction could defeat. The Khorasani had been able to defeat them and even kill the heavily injured Osman. This sort of strength had left a deep impression on them. "The enemy of my enemy is my friend. The Khorasani shouldn't be hostile." Wang Chong turned his head to Gao Xianzhi. Let's go and take a look. We've suffered great losses and don't have many soldiers left. If we can obtain the help of the Khorasani, we'll be of great help in suppressing the Arabs. Moreover, they're more familiar with the Arabian Empire than we are. With them as our guide, we'll be able to avoid a lot of trouble." Gao Xianzhi said after a few moments of thought. The appearance of the Khorasani at a time like this was truly unexpected, but it was definitely good news. Some Khorasani led the way while Wang Chong and Gao Xianzhi brought up the rear. Around half a cup of tea later, Wang Chong's group arrived in the depths of the Black Forest, where the Khorasani army had already concluded its battle. In the Black Forest, in between the rubble and collapsed statues of gods, the corpses of Arabs were strewn all over the place. War horses were strewn across the ground in various postures, their blood freely staining this famous trade route of the Silk Road with blood. In the center of these corpses was an army of around 8,000 or 9,000 soldiers cleaning up the mess. The armor worn by this army was very uniform. The armor was extremely thick, and it gave off the smell of raging fire and fresh blood. Anyone who saw this army would be able to sense the steely and well-tempered aura exuding from them. This aura was extremely similar to that of the Wushang cavalry of the Tang dynasty and the Mamelukes of the Arabs, but it was even thicker. This was the aura of an extremely ancient army with an extremely long legacy. The Angolan cataphracts. This thought emerged in Wang Chong's mind. This was the origin of the Mamelukes and the target of their emulation. The Angolan cataphracts were undoubtedly the strongest army in the region of 1,000 li to the west of the Tsong Mountains. This army had single-handedly forged the power and glory of the Sassanid dynasty. Even after the fall of the Sassanid dynasty, several decades later, this army still exuded an inspiring strength that had not been diminished by the passage of time. Upon seeing this army, Wang Chong finally understood why the Arabian Empire and the Mamelukes were so apprehensive of this remnant army of the Sassanid dynasty. As these thoughts flitted through his mind, Wang Chong quickly came back to his senses and fixed his gaze on the golden armored figure at the front of the army, the Khorasani leader riding a monstrous warhorse and exuding a lofty and unfathomable aura. His expression was solemn and serene, his eyes as bright as the sun in the sky. The warhorse he was riding was also extremely intimidating, its muscles knotted and brimming with explosive power. It was at least 3 times the size of an ordinary warhorse. It was stopped in the middle of the road and was extremely eye-catching. Ase, Chisi Yalikalu. Before Wang Chong could speak, the golden-armored Khorasani leader immediately turned his head, his gaze sweeping past Gao Xianji and Wang Chong before settling on Wang Chong. "Milord, this should be Khorasani Great General Bahram." "He's asking who Great General Wang Chong is." Wan Shuyang rode forward and whispered into Wang Chong's ear. As expected, Wang Chong nodded. As he looked at this Great General Bahram, Wang Chong more or less understood why Abu Muslim had been defeated by several thousand soldiers and why Osman had been killed. In terms of strength, this Great General Bahram was at least on the same level as Abu Muslim at his peak. Even if he was lacking, it wouldn't be by much. Moreover, this Great General Bahram gave off an extremely valiant feeling. He was definitely a veteran of many battles, a top-class general who had experienced mountains of corpses and seas of blood. The Sassanid dynasty had been destroyed by the Arabs several decades ago, and the younger generation of generals simply couldn't possess this sort of aura. It was obvious that this Great General Bahram was a senior general of the Sassanid dynasty. Given his strength and the fact that Abu Muslim had been greatly weakened, he was naturally no match for him. "Sir Senior, come with me." Wang Chong called out to Gao Xianji and urged his horse forward. Great General pays his respects. Chapter 1175. Clang. There was a heaven-shaking clang, and before Wang Chong could react, the Khorasani leader had unsheathed his sword and raised it in the air. At the same time, he lowered his head, his expression solemn. Wang Chong and all the people behind him were dumbfounded by this sight. "Milord, he wishes to exchange swords with Milord. This is a custom of the Sassanid dynasty. An exchange of the most precious sword is a show of courtesy and respect to the most esteemed guest. The people of Khorasani cherish their swords, even more than their own lives, and they rarely use this sort of etiquette." "They rarely use this custom," Wan Shuyang explained. The 56-year-old Wan Shuyang had begun to travel the world at the age of 17 or 18. At that time, the Sassanid dynasty had not yet been destroyed by the Arabs, and Wan Shuyang had traveled the world. He was well acquainted with many of the customs of the Sassanid dynasty, and he knew that this custom had an extraordinary significance to them. "So that's how it is." Wang Chong also understood. After a moment of thought, he unsheathed his Wuzi steel sword and offered it with both hands. As all the Tang dynasty soldiers and Khorasani watched, The two exchanged swords. Bang! The moment the swords were exchanged, all the Angolan cataphracts and Sassanid cavalry behind Bahram began to cheer in excitement. Driya, Shankuzi Masra. At this moment, Bahram spoke once more, his expression one of utmost respect. Great General Bahram says that the Arabs are the eternal foes of the Sassanids. Milord has killed their enemy Ibak, Qutayba, and more than 400,000 Arab soldiers. The Sassanids are eternally grateful to Milord. As long as Milord wishes to deal with the Arabs, the Sassanids are willing to serve Milord and become Milord's staunchest allies to the west of the Tsong Mountains. One Shu Yang translated. Great General is too polite. Wang Chong quickly replied. We've also heard about the plight of the Sassanids. The Arabs are vicious and cruel, delighting in conquest and destruction. In this matter, we share a common enemy. The Tang dynasty is also willing to become the staunchest ally of the Sassanids in dealing with the Arabs. Wang Chong said in a deep voice. General Wang's words are more than enough. Bahram's eyes brightened. As he spoke, he stretched out his thick and powerful right palm. He. Wang Chong smiled and extended his right hand as well. Two steel-like hands clasped tightly in the void. At that moment, no one knew that this simple and forceful handshake had formed the firmest alliance on the continent west of the Tsong Mountains. It had also forged the Tang dynasty's strongest, most loyal, and most reliable ally in the region between Samarkand and Khorasan. As Wang Chong and Bahram released their hands, the entire Black Forest resounded with the cheerful laughter of the two armies. With the addition of Bahram and the 9,000-some Iswaran cataphracts, Wang Chong's forces had received a massive boost in strength. Bahram provided an important piece of information. The Khorasani had learned from the personal guards that Abu Muslim had left in Samarkand that Samarkand had begun to muster the militia. Once Abu Muslim arrived at Samarkand, they would close the city gates and use the thick walls of Samarkand to resist the Tang people. General has never been to Samarkand, so perhaps you do not know, but the walls of Samarkand are not much inferior to those of Talas. If they are allowed to retreat into the city and gather a large number of militia, it will be extremely disadvantageous to us. The urgent task at hand is to not give them any time to catch their breath. In addition, the people we left in Samarkand have successfully infiltrated Abu Muslim's army in the rear and taken control of one of the city gates. But Abu Muslim has always been cautious, and there is no guarantee that he will not begin to mobilize the defenses of Samarkand. Thus, we must be fast. Speed is of the essence in war. Bahram solemnly said. In addition, how long will General remain here in this battle with the Arabs? Bahram's eyes were suffused with deep concern. In order to cooperate with the Tang dynasty, the Sassanid elites had been mobilized, and even the Iswaran cataphracts that had been hidden this entire time had been called out by Bahram. This army was more than enough to deal with the remnants of Abu Muslim's defeated army, but once Abu Muslim caught his breath and gathered more Arab soldiers, the Sassanids would suffer grievous losses. The Iswaran cataphracts had been able to survive the encirclement of the Arabian Empire because they had always hidden themselves, never revealing a single trace of themselves. But once they were exposed, it would not be so easy to hide them again. Great General, there is no need to worry. This war between the Tang dynasty and the Arabs is not just a single war, and our goal is not just Samarkand. In the fight against the Arabs, the Tang dynasty can be the Sassanid dynasty's firmest backer and ally. General has no need to worry about this. Wang Chong knew what Bahram and the Khorasani were worried about, and he immediately heartily laughed as he reassured them. The aggressive nature of the Arabs foreordained that they would forever be enemies of the Great Tang. If they were not dealt a painful blow this time, they would definitely come back next year and besiege the walls of the Great Tang. Just as the Stone of Destiny had said, one mountain could not accommodate two tigers, and one pool could not accommodate two dragons. It was very difficult for two equally massive empires to exist on the same continent. Just this point alone made it impossible for Wang Chong to easily withdraw his soldiers. Wonderful! Bahram's face was agitated. He had led his 8,000 to 9,000 Iswaran cataphracts on this journey, taking such a huge risk, precisely for this promise from Wang Chong. General, be at ease. From Samarkand to Khorasan, we know many rebels, all of them descendants of dynasties whose cities and countries were destroyed by the Arabs. I can contact them and organize them so that they can work with General to sweep away the Arabs. The Arabs are perverse and cruel. They are everyone's enemies. General killed the Arab war god Qutayba at Talas. I am confident that everyone will support General as their leader in resisting the Arabs. At these words, Wang Chong and Gao Xianji glanced at each other, both of them greatly shocked. Although the Tang dynasty had defeated the Arabs in this campaign, it had also suffered grievous losses. Of its more than 100,000 soldiers, only 20 to 30,000 remained. This time, it had only had 8 to 9,000 Aswaran cataphracts as allies, a force that was still too weak to conquer the Arabs. But now, it seemed that the Tang dynasty would be able to obtain far more assistance than this. This was definitely a pleasant surprise. Great General, this is excellent. Let us proceed according to Great General's plan. Wang Chong turned his head and smiled at Bahram. The Tang dynasty soldiers were extremely exhausted from the battle, and the war with the Arabs was bound to be long and drawn out. Wang Chong ordered the army to rest for a while, replenish their strength and food, and then work with the Aswaran cataphracts to set out once more. Speed was paramount in war, and this time, the two armies made no more stops. They passed through the Black Forest and headed toward Samarkand. About 2 hours later, a huge city that towered into the clouds like a towering mountain came into view. What a massive city! Li Sai covered his brow with his hand as he stared at this majestic city, his eyes widening. The city of Talas was already massive, but this city was even larger and more majestic than the city of Talas. The thick and sturdy walls extended into the heavens. From a distance, one could tell that this city was even more difficult to breach than the city of Talas. Around Li Sai, Cheng Qianli, Shi Yuanqing, Lu Shi, and Xue Qianjun all had similar looks in their eyes. It was clear that this fortress of the east had left an extremely deep impression on them. Begin! In the distance, Bahram, mounted on his monstrous warhorse, waved a signal banner at the high walls. In the next moment, with a rumble, a huge city gate that was 30 to 40 meters tall suddenly opened slowly, revealing a passageway that led to the military town of Samarkand. The opening of the gate made everyone feel like a heavy stone had been lifted from their hearts, and they instantly felt much more relaxed. Kaio! Clang! With a clang, Wang Chong sat on the white-hoofed shadow's back and took out the sword he had exchanged with Bahram. The sharp tip of the sword was aimed at the heavens, its cold light reflecting off of it. Rumble! In the next moment, it was as if the mountains were collapsing and the earth was cracking. The two armies and nearly 30,000 elites surged forward like a mighty tide, charging toward Samarkand. Ziyad, listen to my order. Reinforce the defenses and change all the defenses. Increase the number of soldiers stationed at each gate, and increase the number of soldiers stationed at each gate by 4 to 5 times. Samarkand's walls are high and thick. This will be our most important tool against the Tang people. As long as we have this city, the Tang people will find it very difficult to break through, not even in a year. Within Samarkand, Abu Muslim was pacing back and forth in the domed hall, his expression tense and his eyes brimming with unconcealable worry. If one looked carefully, one would even notice that his eyes were bloodshot. In the Battle of Talas, the Arabs had suffered an unprecedented defeat. Ibak had been killed, the Mamluks had been heavily wounded, and Osman had been ambushed and killed by Bahram. Most importantly, even the governor of War of the North, Qutayba, had died at the hands of the Tang people, as well as more than 400,000 Arab elites. Just the thought of such a miserable defeat would make any Arab governor's scalp go numb. Even now, Abu Muslim didn't know how he should explain this to the caliph, nor how he should face the furious caliph. Yes, this general will do so. Chapter 1176. This time, the tens of thousands of Arab soldiers were truly panicking like stray dogs. They had traveled from Talas to Samarkand, and the number of soldiers gathered around Abu Muslim and Ziyad had long since dwindled to less than 30,000. Fortunately, they had Samarkand. When he thought about how sturdy Samarkand was, Ziyad immediately calmed down. At the very least, The two of them could use this city to catch their breath. Reporting. Ziad had barely taken 2 steps out of the hall when he heard a frantic voice. The two of them tensed up and turned their heads to see an Arab messenger rushing in, his face pale and panting for breath. Reporting. The second gate of Samarkand has been broken. The Sassanids have led more than 20,000 Tang people into the city. The moment the messenger entered the hall, he immediately kneeled down, his body drenched in sweat as if on the verge of collapse. What? Abu Muslim and Ziad shuddered at these words as if they had seen a ghost. How could this be? Where are the scouts? Why didn't we receive any news of such a major event? How could we not have seen such a massive army approach? Ziad's eyes were round, not even daring to believe it. An army of more than 10,000 was such a massive target that only a blind person could have missed it. But they hadn't even received any news of the enemy's approach. "Milord, the scouts have already sent out the news, but before they could even approach the hall, they were assassinated by the Sassanid experts hiding in the city. Right now, the Sassanid spies in the city are committing arson, assassinations, and uprisings. Samarkand is in chaos. Milord, we should quickly withdraw." The messenger's face was fraught with worry. Although the messenger's last words were only a few words, they were like a thunderclap in the ears of Abu Muslim and Ziad, causing their minds to tremble and their faces to pale. The words, "My lord, let's evacuate quickly," were even more shocking than when Wang Chong and the Sassanids joined hands to attack the city. The army had been defeated, and if Abu Muslim and Ziad recovered their strength, they would still be able to fight to the death, but the morale of the army had been shattered. Even if Abu Muslim and Ziad recovered their strength, they would be powerless to reverse the situation. Qutayba's death in front of tens of thousands of soldiers had dealt a massive blow to the army. The army no longer dared to fight with the Tang army. As these thoughts flew through his mind, Abu Muslim raised his head to the sky and gave a long sigh. This time, they might not have any hope of turning the tables. "Pass down my order. All troops retreat. Leave Samarkand to the Tang people." Abu Muslim's voice was tinged with unwillingness, but there was nothing he could do to reverse the situation. Ziad stood to the side, a complicated expression on his face. "Yes, sir." Finally, Ziad stepped out of the hall. A few moments later, the signal flag was waved, and all the Arab soldiers in the city were swept away from Samarkand toward the distant Khorasan. What? Abu Muslim and Ziad fled so quickly? In Samarkand, Wang Chong couldn't help but sneer when he heard the news. "I originally thought that there would be a major battle, but it seems like there's no need for that. Su Kui, write 2 letters in my name. One is to Feng Changqing, who has been left behind in Anxi, and have him send an army to Samarkand. The other is to the imperial court. Now that the war is over, the imperial court will need to send someone to take over the aftermath." Talas had been destroyed, so the Tang dynasty's best bridgehead against the Arabs was Samarkand. Once this strategic fortress was occupied, even a small number of soldiers would be enough to contend against the Arabs. "Lord Wang Chong, the road west from Samarkand is practically flat. There aren't many fortified cities that we can rely on. Abu Muslim doesn't have a strong enough defense, so he'll definitely flee to Khorasan. This is the best chance for us to launch an attack and encircle the Arabs." Bahram sternly said, "Just as Milord suggests, let the entire army move out and continue the pursuit." Wang Chong nodded. With the Sassanid acting as a guide and spy, Wang Chong's forces were like fish in water in the pursuit. They didn't encounter much pressure. A few moments later, the drums began to beat. After leaving behind several thousand soldiers to defend Samarkand with the Khorasani, the two armies set off in pursuit of Abu Muslim. As the news of Qutayba's death at Talas spread, from Khorasan in the east to Samarkand in the west, the entire eastern region of Arabia was shaken, and the people of the countries that Arabia had once conquered cheered. And with Bahram's prestige and his ability to mediate, more and more rebel soldiers joined the great Tang army like a rolling snowball. When they had first set out from Samarkand, Wang Chong's army, including the Sassanids, had only been 30 to 40,000 soldiers. But on the road, he had quickly gathered an additional 100,000 soldiers, and this army was still growing at an astonishing rate. In the end, Wang Chong had gathered 30 to 40 different factions, an army of more than 200,000, and his momentum was incredible. Abu Muslim had originally been able to put up a fight against Wang Chong, but later on, when Wang Chong had gathered more than 200,000 soldiers, he no longer had this chance. The Arabs had been unscrupulous in their extortion and slaughter, causing the people of the eastern region to seethe with resentment. While the Arabs had a powerful army and could suppress the situation, a new challenger appeared, especially after the Arabs suffered a crushing defeat at Talas. This immediately caused the people to be filled with resentment, and this was the greatest aid to Wang Chong's western expedition. While Wang Chong was pursuing Abu Muslim's defeated army, elsewhere, as the news of the Great Tang's victory at Talas spread, all the empires and civilizations of the continent began to tremble, and the power structure began to quietly shift. Flap flap. A messenger bird flew from the distant Samarkand to the distant Anshi Protectorate headquarters. As the news of the victory at Talas spread, the countless empires and factions of the western regions who had been watching this epic battle were left slack-jawed. 100,000 against 500,000. Such a massive difference in soldiers, but the Tang dynasty still won. Unbelievable! In the distant palace of the Empress Kingdom of Beilu, a stalwart figure with a long beard suddenly stood up, his large eyes brimming with shock. The war between Arabia and the Tang dynasty had swept through the kingdoms of the western regions like a storm. Countless countries were swaying like grass on the wall, struggling to decide whether to submit to the Tang dynasty or to Arabia. All the countries were speculating on who would be the final victor, and the Empress Kingdom of Beilu was clearly leaning toward Arabia. No matter what, an army of 500,000 elites, with powerful individuals like Qutayba, Abu Muslim, and Osman presiding over it, should have been impossible for them to lose. But reality had given the entire Empress Kingdom of Beilu, including its king and ministers, a vicious slap to the face. Pass on my order. Prepare 10,000 taels of gold, 10 bushels of treasure, 100 beauties, and 10,000 cows and sheep. Have them immediately delivered to the Anshi Protectorate headquarters to celebrate the Tang dynasty's victory. The king of the Empress Kingdom of Beilu sat in the hall and roared like a lion. A little guard who was passing on the order was kicked out of the hall by him because his footsteps were too slow. But unlike the Empress Kingdom of Beilu, Greater and Lesser Balor were rejoicing and excited. I knew it would be like this. The Tang dynasty really did win. When the two kings of Greater and Lesser Balor received the news, they gathered together to celebrate this great news. At an exorbitant price, Greater and Lesser Balor had loaned out 8,000 of their best pikemen. Although these pikemen had all died in the battle, the Tang dynasty had won, and Greater and Lesser Balor had received an enormous return on their investment. With this victory, Greater and Lesser Balor had made the Tang dynasty owe them an enormous favor. In the western regions, Greater and Lesser Balor would be able to rely on a great tree to enjoy the shade, no longer having to worry about Uzun's oppression or invasion. As for the 8,000 pikemen who had died in battle, although the loss was truly heart-wrenching, Greater and Lesser Balor had mastered the training methods for pikemen, so it was only a matter of time before they could train another batch. And Greater and Lesser Balor were not the only ones celebrating this victory. Besides those kingdoms that had supported the Tang dynasty, there were also countless mercenary tribes that had participated in the battle. Victory! The Tang dynasty has won, and so has their leader. The Arabs have kicked a metal plate this time. All the tribes that had been hired by the Tang dynasty to participate in the Battle of Talas, from south to north, east to west, were cheering. Victory and defeat were commonplace for soldiers. Almost all the mercenaries that had participated in the Battle of Talas had been killed, but to the tribes and shepherds in the rear, this was not important. They only cared about one thing: whether or not the valiant warriors of these tribes had stood on the side of the victor in battle. Although many warriors had died in battle, this also meant that a large amount of compensation money would pour in after the battle. And this money, together with the support and affirmation of the Tang dynasty, would be an opportunity for the tribes to develop and strengthen in the future. For the tribe, everyone could be sacrificed, and dying in battle was the best ending for a warrior. This was a principle that all the shepherds believed in. Damn it! This is a big problem. Chapter 1177. These Arabs are truly too useless. If they had known that they would lose to the Tang dynasty, they wouldn't have offended the Tang dynasty for some petty profit. When Qixi Protector General Wang Chong had begun to recruit soldiers in the western regions, not all the tribes had responded enthusiastically. There was no lack of tribes like the Arjun tribe, which had accepted the Arabs' bribes and found all sorts of excuses to avoid employment while secretly stirring up trouble in the western regions. It would have been fine if the Tang dynasty had been defeated, as the Arjun tribe would have been able to obtain a large amount of war contribution money from the Arabs. But now that the Arabs had been defeated and the dust had settled, the Arjun tribe needed to prepare to face the Tang dynasty's wrath and settle the score afterwards. "Chief, what do we do now? I heard that the new leader of the Tang dynasty is not to be trifled with." A core member of the Arjun tribe had long ago turned pale and was sweating profusely. Qixi Protector General Wang Chong had only appeared in the western regions for a very short period of time, but his reputation had long ago reached the ears of the entire region. For the sake of the Ganka tribe, this Tang dynasty commander had exterminated the Saka tribe on the grounds of treachery, and in the war with the Arabs he had killed another 400,000 Arabs. This was a truly callous and bloodthirsty Azura great general. No one dared to imagine what sort of fate awaited these tribes once he returned and settled the score. "There's nothing else we can do. Bring me a brush and paper. Go to the Anxi Protectorate headquarters and bring gold and silver to beg for forgiveness from Anxi's garrison commander Feng Changqing. Say that we were forced by the Arabs and had no other choice. We had no intention of opposing the Tang dynasty." As the one-eyed Argent leader spoke, he suddenly gritted his teeth and increased the stakes. "In addition, send me 100,000 cows and sheep, 100 beauties of the western regions, and 10 beauties from the Arabs. If Feng Changqing doesn't agree, we can only flee to the far north, to those desolate and uninhabited lands of ice and cold. I hear that there are some barbarians there. When the time comes, we might have to fight with them." Yes. Similar events were occurring throughout the western regions, and the great victory at Talas intimidated all the tribes. Unlike in the past, the Tang dynasty had defeated the Arabian Empire west of the Tsong Mountains, a power that everyone acknowledged to be the strongest, proving that it was the #1 power on the continent. Now, all the countries were filled with deep reverence for the strongest empire on the continent. At this moment, the most excited person was none other than Feng Changqing, who was guarding Suye City and guarding the rear. They won. The Tang dynasty won. "Milord, General Wang, I knew you would return in triumph." Feng Changqing sat on the spacious throne in the main hall, holding the letter that Wang Chong and Gao Xinji had sent from Samarkand. He was beaming with joy. He held that thin piece of paper in his hand and never got tired of looking at it. Reporting. While Feng Changqing was flipping through the letter again and again, a voice came from outside. In the blink of an eye, a messenger from the Anxi Protectorate strode in. "Milord, the Jursak tribe of the western regions has sent a congratulatory letter, congratulating the Tang dynasty on their great victory at Talas. In addition, they have sent 10,000 taels of gold, 10,000 cows and sheep, 100 beauties, and all kinds of pearls and agate. In addition, the Naaman tribe has sent 10,000 taels of gold and 100,000 cows and sheep. The Chidi tribe has sent 10,000 bushels of agate, countless jadeite, and 5,000 jade pendants carved from suet white jade. The Baltali tribe has sent 20 supreme luminous night pearls, 10,000 warhorses, and 20,000 taels of gold to congratulate the Tang dynasty on their victory. The Chechikian kingdom of the western regions has sent 50,000 taels of gold, 20,000 bolts of silk, and 5,000 pairs of jadeite. The Shi-Kimi kingdom of the western regions has sent 30,000 taels of gold, 300 beauties." The messenger knelt on one knee on the ground and read a long list of names in his hand. Feng Changqing sat at the head of the hall, a smile on his face so wide that it seemed as if he could barely close his mouth. Many of these tribes were allies of the Great Tang, but the majority of those that had sent gold and beauties were wavering on the right and left side of the conflict, some of them even working together with the Arabs in an ambiguous relationship. But Feng Changqing did not care. The war was over, and what he needed to do was win the most for the Tang dynasty. 10,000 taels of gold, 10,000 cows and sheep, 100 beauties. You think you can escape this calamity with just this? Impossible. If I don't make you bleed a little more this time, you'll never be able to remember this lesson. Feng Changqing narrowed his eyes, his right index finger lightly tapping on the metal armrest of his throne. In a flash, he had come up with a plan. Pass on my order. Recruit more soldiers and gather mercenaries. 10 days from now, they will follow me to Samarkand. I'd like to see which countries and tribes will dare to refuse. In addition, send a letter to Lady Su Yiqin in the rear. If we want to advance west and occupy Samarkand and the other Arab territories, we will need her help. Feng Changqing sternly said. Yes. Just a few days later, Wang Chang's second messenger pigeon flew along the Silk Road and into the capital of the Tang dynasty. Boom! When the news of the great victory at Talas reached the imperial court, the entire court rejoiced. Even though there had been many disagreements between the civil and military officials, the news of the Tang dynasty's victory over the western barbarians to the west of the Tsong Mountains had stirred everyone's spirits. Ah, victory! As expected, we won again. This king knew that you wouldn't disappoint me. As long as you are here, the Tang dynasty will have nothing to worry about on the border. When the king of Song heard this news, he was in high spirits and elated. Only the heavens knew how much pressure he had endured in this campaign to reinforce Talas. But now that the clouds had dispersed and the rain had cleared, everything was over. Most importantly, Wang Chong had used an unprecedented victory to give everyone a satisfactory answer, once more proving that he had a discerning eye for talent and had not judged wrongly. Bastard, so many imperial great generals couldn't kill him. Has this brat gained some kind of spirit? King Qi had just walked out of the imperial palace when he couldn't help but slam his fist into the carriage, pulverizing it to pieces. King Qi was not that interested in military affairs. He only cared about authority, but as long as the Wang clan, as long as the king of Song, and especially that brat were present, he would never be able to get what he wanted. King Qi had launched several attacks against the Wang clan and the king of Song, but every one of them had been foiled by that 17-year-old boy. Although Wang Chong was young, he had long ago become a thorn in King Qi's side. In the War of the Southwest, Wang Chong had obtained the favor of the Holy Emperor and been promoted to nobility, becoming the first young marquis in the history of the Central Plains. Finally, at the age of 17, he had become Qixi Protector General. In addition, with this great victory, if this continued, he would be promoted to the rank of nobility, even becoming a king or marquis. This made King Qi feel an enormous threat. To the southeast of the imperial palace, in the renowned Four Quarters Embassy, a carriage had long since stopped. The carriage door opened, and Wang Chang's big uncle, Wang Zhen, tidied his clothes and walked out. The current Wang Zhen had a bright gleam in his eyes, and his face was flushed as if he was drunk. Furthermore, the unconcealable smile at the corner of his eyes revealed his current mood. His nephew had fought a battle of 100,000 against 500,000, defeating the combined army of Arabia, Uzan, and the Western Turks. The Wang clan had truly become famous throughout the world and received the respect of all. As his big uncle, Wang Zhen could not help but feel honored. Let's go. Take me to see the old master. I want to personally tell him this news, Wang Zhen loudly said. Passing through the main gate and through the bamboo forest, Wang Zhen headed for the main hall of the Western Quarters. Before Wang Zhen had even entered, he could already hear the sounds of laughter, the old master's loud laughter particularly striking. Zhen, you've come at just the right time. That child Chong won a major victory at Talas, truly living up to the expectations of the Tang dynasty and His Majesty. Come, let's drink a cup together. An elderly and deep voice came from the main hall. Duke Jiao, dressed in casual clothes, was seated at the head of the hall. The moment Wang Zhen crossed the threshold, Duke Jiao waved at him. Zhen, it's rare for your father to be in such a mood. Today, you should accompany him for a good drink. The silver-haired old madam called out to Duke Jiao, her face amiable. Duke Jiao's health had never been very good, so the old madam had always strictly forbidden him from drinking alcohol. But this time, she had not only made an exception and allowed him to drink, she had even invited her eldest son, Wang Zhen, to accompany him. Wang Zhen had been confused at the start, not understanding how the old master had learned of the news so quickly, but when the figure at the old master's side turned his head, Wang Zhen instantly understood. "Elder Yi," Wang Zhen blurted out. No wonder. With Elder Yi here, it was no wonder the old master had learned of the news so quickly. "This child will go." Wang Zhen faintly smiled, raised his robe, and quickly sat down at the table covered with side dishes. Taking a small porcelain cup from the table, he clinked it against the wine cups of the two elders. "For Chong. For the Tang dynasty." Bang! At the same time, at the back door of the Su mansion, the oldest and most respected mansion in the capital, a tightly shut door suddenly opened. An 8 or 9-year-old child, holding a letter in his hand, yelled as he dashed in. "Ah, master, victory at Talus. Senior brother has won. Senior brother has won." Xiao Jianjian was so excited that his face was red. He didn't even notice that he had lost one of his shoes. His eyes flashed as he ran toward the ancient-styled yet somewhat shabby residence in the center of the Su residence. "Halt!" When he was 10-some steps from the residence, an elderly and dignified shout came from within, a thunderous roar. Upon hearing this voice, Xiao Jianjian's body trembled and he stopped. "Didn't I tell you already? As a general, even if Mount Tai collapses in front of you, you won't lose your composure. It's just a minor border war. Look at how impatient you are." The elderly voice was extremely stern. Chapter 1178. But that was not a normal battle. That was Senior Brother's battle. 100,000 against 500,000. That was a huge victory for the few. Xiao Jianjian lowered his head and curled his lips. His fingers twirled as he stared at his feet. His face was filled with dissatisfaction. "How dare you talk back?" So Yongsun bellowed. "That's right." Xiao Jianjian was unconvinced. His voice was as soft as a mosquito's, almost inaudible. "Xiao Jianjian, that's enough. Don't talk back to your master. Your master already knows about your senior brother's situation. You'd better leave now." Just then, another voice rang out from within the house. It sounded completely different from So Yongsun's. It was not as powerful and authoritative. "Got it, Uncle Fang." Xiao Jianjian stuck out his tongue and made a face before running away. Little Jianjian didn't know that in the house with the door tightly shut, two old eyes were staring at his back for a long time before looking away. "Fang Hong, you're spoiling him too much. It's just a battle. He's too impatient. How can he lead the army, devise strategies, and conquer the world?" Seated on a wooden armchair, Su Zhengchen glanced at the old servant beside him and said with a deep voice, "The art of war involved the lives of tens of thousands of soldiers, as well as the lives of the commoners. As the saying went, one couldn't afford to neglect important matters of the empire." Thus, Su Zhengchen had always been strict with his military, and it was the same for little Jianjian. "Hee, old master, why are you so strict with him? He's just a child. Besides, isn't old master's legacy inherited by that child, Wang Chong?" The old servant, Fang Hong, said with a smile. "You." For a moment, Su Zhengchen was at a loss for words. The old servant smiled but did not speak. He had served old master for most of his life and knew what old master was thinking. So Yongsun did not admit it, but deep down he had already treated Wang Chong as his disciple. Otherwise, he wouldn't have put in so much effort to teach him the art of god and demon obliteration and help him train 4,000 soldiers of the Azure Martial Army. It was just that Su Zhengchen had never admitted to it. "This child will be spoiled by you sooner or later. I don't know what to do with you." Su Zhengchen glared at this old servant who had served him for 50 to 60 years. Then he turned around, picked up the wine cup on the table, and drained it in a single gulp. The old servant didn't say a word, but the smile on his lips grew wider and wider. He picked up the white porcelain wine gourd on the table and filled Su Zhengchen's cup once more. His old master usually drank no more than 4 cups of wine, but this was already the 8th time he had filled Wang Chong's cup, a fact that not even he had noticed. Although he had been playing down the matter and using it as an ordinary battle, Feng Hong knew that his old master was actually more delighted than anyone else. As the wine pot on the table slowly emptied, the old servant quietly replaced it with another pot of wine and continued to fill So Young-sun's cup. In all his time with his old master, Feng Hong had never seen his old master so happy. And after meeting that child called Chonga, the smile on his old master's face grew wider and wider, comforting Feng Hong. And as the news of Tala's spread, the influence of this matter in the capital continued to grow. Swish, swish. As imperial proclamations were pasted on the various gates of the Tang dynasty's capital and more details were revealed, the capital began to seethe. What did I say? The young marquis is the reincarnation of the heavenly fate star. He came to assist His Majesty in sweeping away the barbarians and continuing the golden age of our Tang dynasty. 100,000 against 500,000. This young marquis is the true war god of the new generation. Only the crown prince's junior guardian Wang Zhongxi and the war god of the older generation, So Young-sun, can compare to him. As expected of the descendant of Duke Jiao. The Wang clan has 3 generals, a true sect of martyrs, a truly loyal subject of the Tang dynasty. We should ask the Holy Emperor and the imperial court to grant the Wang clan a title. That's right. Let's go together and ask the Holy Emperor to grant the Wang clan a title. The various parts of the city gate were bustling with activity. Countless merchants, wealthy clans, and even some of the nobles of the capital had gathered. Not only that, all the restaurants, taverns, tea-houses, and inns of the capital were discussing the gruesome battle that had taken place at Talas. The people loudly discussed the matter, all of them extremely proud. The matter of granting the Wang clan a title was initially only discussed by the common people, but later on, even the officials of the court agreed and began to submit memorials. In the end, it became a massive voice that could not be ignored. In the end, all the memorials were gathered in the depths of the imperial palace, in the hands of the Holy Emperor. The imperial palace towered over the imperial palace, and in its deepest depths was a golden hall, dignified and solemn. It stood at the highest point of the imperial palace like a giant bird with its wings spread wide, looking down on the capital. The Taiji Palace was the residence of the Holy Emperor of the Tang dynasty. No matter how fierce the storms and storms of the outside world raged, this place was always calm, as if no storm could reach this place. Your Majesty, after the great victory at Talas, that child Wang Chong truly did not fail to live up to Your Majesty's high hopes. They have already crossed the Black Forest, occupied Samarkand, and are now heading west toward the end of the Silk Road, Khorasan. To the west of the Tsong Mountains, the barbarian lands have already become the territory of my Tang dynasty, and Your Majesty's territory has greatly increased. This is an unprecedentedly grand occasion. The voices in the imperial court that wish to grant the Wang clan a title are getting louder and louder. This old servant has already collected several hundred letters. Outside the hall, Eunuch Gao had his hands tucked into his sleeves and was smiling like a Maitreya Buddha. Your Majesty, granting a title is no small matter. Starting with His Majesty Gaozong, the imperial court has not granted a title to any great clan for several decades. Moreover, once a title is given, it will be equivalent to having the Iron Scroll of the Alchemy Edict, a golden medallion of immunity. This might cause a new upheaval in the imperial court. The imperial court rarely granted titles or commendations to any particular clan, and this was not just out of caution. Based on the experience of the previous dynasties, all those great clans that were granted titles ended up becoming arrogant because they were favored, ultimately becoming a scourge for the imperial court. Even if this did not appear at the time, their descendants had basically confirmed this. The common people did not know this, but the imperial court, which had inherited the records of the previous dynasties, was well aware of this matter. And that was not all. Because the successive dynasties rarely granted titles, the granting of titles itself had a very deep meaning. In the minds of the officials, it represented the emperor's special favor. As a result, in a short period of time, an enormous faction quickly formed around these noble clans, intensifying the factional strife in the imperial court and destroying the original balance. This was the reason why the imperial court was so cautious when it came to conferring titles. This did not mean that titles could not be granted. Only clans that were extremely loyal to the imperial court and could be completely trusted could receive such an honor. The hall was quiet, as if it was in another time and space. No one knew what the Holy Emperor was thinking at this moment. "Your Majesty, why don't you allow this old servant to refuse?" Gao Lishur said after a moment of silence. Although public opinion was at its peak and the voices for petitions were at their strongest, with even the civil and military officials of the imperial court participating, it was not too difficult for the imperial court to refuse. There were thousands of reasons to refuse. This was how politics worked. "There's no need." A moment later, a dignified voice rang out from the most authoritative hall in the world. "Pass on my decree. The petition is approved." Hearing these words, Gao Lishur's entire body shook. He seemed to understand something in an instant and lowered his head. "This old servant will obey." In the generation of the Holy Emperor, this was definitely the first noble clan to be granted a title. Even old Master Yao, who was so favored by the Holy Emperor and had such great influence in the imperial court, had not received such an honor. The granting of titles to the Wang family would probably shock the entire imperial court for a very long time and affect the structure of the entire Tang dynasty in the future. Rumble. When the Holy Emperor ordered the 6 departments to discuss granting titles to the Wang family, this matter immediately caused a huge uproar in the entire Tang dynasty. Favor. What kind of favor is this? The people were in an uproar, especially those who hoped to grant the Wang family a title. But the reaction in the imperial court was completely different. I didn't expect the Holy Emperor's favor for Wang Chong and the Wang family to reach this level. In the imperial court, an old imperial censor received the news. His eyes widened in shock, his face full of disbelief. In the depths of the imperial palace, in the Yuzhen palace. "Ah, little sister, do you see this? What do you think of this sworn brother of yours? What kind of glory is this family of valiant martyrs? Although you and I are like rootless duckweed in this palace, as long as we have the support of my sworn brother and the Wang family, our position in the imperial court will be as stable as a boulder. We might even be on equal footing with King Qi and the King of Song, becoming the 3rd power in the Tang dynasty." Yang Zhao, dressed in white scholarly robes and a black bedding, walked in from outside, his sleeves fluttering in the wind. Although he did his best to imitate the manner of those scholars, in the end he was still lacking. After just a few steps, he returned to his original self. With his head held high and his face beaming with joy, he walked toward the hall and hurried over to Consort Taijin in the jade tent. "Big brother, this time, you've really done something that's most beneficial to us." The jade tent fluttered, and a jade white foot stretched out. Consort Taijin supported a pretty maid at her side as she stood up and slowly walked out of the tent. At this moment, Consort Taijin's face was also brimming with joy. Her older brother was a lazy glutton and addicted to gambling. In the few months he had been in the capital, he had not only lost all his traveling expenses, but also spent every day in the gambling houses, begging on the streets for money. He was truly a disappointment to the extreme. But everyone had their own shortcomings and strengths. After being in the capital for so long, he had still done a great deed. Just as he had said, Wang Chong had written her 2 poems on the tune of purity and peace, and Consort Taijin had thus let off the King of Song. Moreover, Yang Zhao and Wang Chong were sworn brothers, so they had a close relationship. In the eyes of outsiders, they were on the same side. With the support of Wang Chong and the Wang family, she would no longer be completely helpless in the palace and in the court. "Someone, take me to His Majesty. This time, I will personally leave the palace to pay a visit to the Wang clan and see this Madame Zhao." Chapter 1179. While the entire Tang dynasty was rejoicing over their victory at Talas, in the distant northeast corner of the Uzun Plateau, a lonely whistle echoed through the air. On this rugged road leading to Yuseng, a defeated army of several thousand was slowly making its way down the winding road, its helmets and armor stripped off, its morale low. And in the middle of this army, there was a white yak war flag that was extremely eye-catching. This was the remnant army that Hwaba Senji had led to retreat from Talas. Hwaba Senji's army had spent more than twice as much time retreating from the stone bridge. The war at Talas had ended, and the news had spread throughout the western regions and the surrounding countries. All the countries large and small along the way had tightly shut their gates, clearly showing hostility to this defeated army. In the past, when the army had just set off and was at its peak, Hwaba Senji would have long ago led his army to attack and exterminate these small countries if they dared to treat the Uzun in such a manner. But this army, with its great general and wise minister dead, only had a few thousand soldiers left, unable to pose any threat to these countries on the way back. There were many times when Hwaba Senji had been forced to lead his army far away to avoid conflict with these factions. This was an unprecedented humiliation. But Hwaba Senji no longer cared about this. Prime Minister, General, it won't be long before you can return to Uzun. As the Uzun plateau approached, Hwaba Senji turned his head to look at the corpses of Daluan Ruozan, Hwashu Wizong, and Dusong Mangpoj on the warhorses at his side, a desolate expression on his face. Those cheerful and heroic words they had said when they left still rang in his ears. The grandiose and invincible army of 100,000 seemed like it had only been yesterday. But in the blink of an eye, all this had vanished like smoke, leaving him alone with his several thousand defeated soldiers. Hwaba Senji could not help but reveal a sorrowful expression when he thought of that. However, he quickly calmed himself down. He no longer cared about anything else. There was only one thought left in his mind, and that was to bring the corpses of the great minister and the others back to the plateau no matter what. General, look up ahead. As he was immersed in his sorrow, he heard a cry of alarm as an Uzun soldier pointed forward. Hwaba Sang was startled, and he subconsciously raised his head. At the start he had been dumbfounded, but he quickly saw a dense army resting on the distant Tibetan plateau. From a distance, it looked like an ant. Translated by Hypersheep 325. It's the Western Turks. Hwaba Senji's eyes widened as if he had been provoked, and he raised his head, his mind much clearer than before. Almost at the same time, the army resting on the plateau also noticed the new army. Under the green flag of the Golden Wolf, a tall and burly figure rode on a warhorse and galloped forward a few steps before stopping. "Milord, it's the Uzun. They've also retreated." A voice suddenly rang in his ear. Chechen Benba urged his horse's abdomen to catch up from behind, looking at the direction of Hwaba Senji below the plateau. Dewusili's face was pale and his aura extremely weak. His gaze swept through the air and met Hwaba Senji's gaze. At this moment, Hwaba Senji's eyes were brimming with rage, but Dewusili couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. At the most crucial moment of the Battle of Talas, Dewusili had been frightened away by Wang Chang's palm, completely abandoning his allies. For someone of Dewusili's status as the Celestial Wolf Great General to say such a thing was an extremely humiliating matter. How could Dewusili not feel embarrassed now that he had run into Hwaba Senji's group of Uzun soldiers? But a moment later, Dewusili turned his head and looked past Hwaba Senji, quickly landing on the corpses of Daluan Ruozan, Hwashu Wizong, and Dusong Mangpoj. Dewusili had a complicated expression on his face, a hint of sorrow in his eyes. Although he had not been in an alliance with the Uzun for very long and had often schemed against each other, the fox mourned the death of the rabbit. Daluan Ruozan, Hwashu Wizong, and Dusong Mangpoj had been killed by Wang Chong and the Tang people, and Dewusili and his Western Turkic army had suffered the same fate. How could Dewusili not be moved by this? "Great General, should we go and meet with them before we leave?" Che Benba said. "There's no need." Dewusili shook his head and quickly returned to normal. "The Battle of Talas is over, and our alliance with the Uzun is no more. In the future, we will have to fight our own battles and face the even stronger Tang dynasty and the retaliation that can come at any time. There is no need for us to meet again." A similar conversation was taking place with the remnants of Uzun's army on the plateau. Without any pause, Dewusili turned his horse around and led the remnants of his army into the distance. At almost the same time, Hwaba Senji set off with his army. Although they were also heading toward the plateau, they were going in a completely different direction. The two armies acted like they had never known each other before, forgetting each other. At the same time, in Khorasan, tens of thousands of li from the capital, the northern winds were blowing. At this moment, this western terminus of the Silk Road was covered in withered grass and frost, and the temperature was as cold as ice. And in the withered grass outside Khorasan, tens of thousands of warhorses stood in a vast sea. In the middle of the army, a huge five-clawed dragon banner fluttered in the wind, and around this dragon banner of the Great Tang were countless other banners, each one pointing to the clouds. The 20,000-some soldiers of the Tang dynasty and the 180,000 rebel soldiers of the various dynasties, for a total of 200,000, were lined up in front of the gates of Khorasan, the air somber and somber. "General, it's about time. Everything is ready." Great General Bahram rode up on his monstrous warhorse and whispered into Wang Chong's ear. Wang Chong nodded, and then he turned to the imposing and impregnable walls of Khorasan. The black Arab war banners covered the walls, and countless Arab soldiers had gathered above the walls. In the center of these Arab soldiers stood Abu Muslim and Ziyad, side by side. The two of them had unleashed a storm of energy that seemed to pierce through the heavens as they confronted the 200,000 soldiers of the alliance. "Abu Muslim, Ziyad, have the two of you made your decision?" Wang Chong's voice resounded over the entire army. From Samarkand to this place, even though Wang Chong and his army had pursued day and night, not giving Abu Muslim any time to catch his breath, they had still been one step behind. Abu Muslim had fled all the way to Khorasan, and after 7 or 8 days, he had finally recovered his strength. Moreover, he had used his title as the governor of Iron and Blood in the Eastern War Zone to gather a large number of militias. He was now using the thick walls of Khorasan to contend against the Tang dynasty. But no matter how stubbornly Abu Muslim resisted, it was all too late. With the elite soldiers of the Tang dynasty serving as the core and the 180,000 soldiers he had recruited, no matter how unwilling Abu Muslim was, he was powerless to reverse the situation. Wang Chong's momentum had been established, and there was no one in the Eastern Arabian front that could contend against him. "Wang Chong, there's no point in talking. Arabia has no surrendering generals, no army that will surrender without a fight. Bring it on." Abu Muslim stood like a mountain on the walls, a firm expression on his face. "Wang Chong, don't get carried away by your wishful thinking. We've already replaced all the guards at the gates of Khorasan. What happened at Samarkand will not happen again. So what if you have 200,000 soldiers? Khorasan is impregnable and can never be broken." At the same time, Ziyad spoke up from atop the walls. Khorasan had once been the royal capital of the Sassanid dynasty. Back then, hundreds of thousands of Arab soldiers had been bombarding the capital for several years, but they had not been able to break through precisely because of these sturdy walls. Eventually, the 3 Arab governors had joined together and dispatched the behemoth army. Only by relying on the massive size and destructive power of these behemoths had they managed to break through the walls and wipe out the entire Sassanid dynasty. But after the war, all the walls had been repaired, and the Arabs had even reinforced the original foundations of the Sassanids. Although Wang Chong's group had 200,000 soldiers, it was still far from enough to besiege a city. At Talas, Abu Muslim's 400,000 soldiers had spent 2 months attacking the city of Talas without being able to break through the defenses of the Anshi Protectorate army. Moreover, Wang Chong's current army was much smaller than Abu Muslim's. "Haha, it seems like you're prepared to put up a stubborn resistance and fight to the death." Wang Chong faintly smiled, not at all surprised by Abu Muslim and Ziyad's reactions. "Since that's the case, I'll fulfill your wish." On the walls of Khorasan, Abu Muslim and Ziyad widened their eyes at Wang Chong's words. The walls of Khorasan were extremely smooth, and the two of them did not believe that Wang Chong's soldiers could break them, but Wang Chong's confidence and ease were truly unsettling. "Wang Chong, what do you mean?" Ziyad couldn't help but say. "Heh." Wang Chong faintly smiled, paying no attention to Ziyad. He had not brought his army here to exchange heartfelt thoughts with Abu Muslim and Ziyad. "Great General Bahram, if you're ready, let's begin." Wang Chong turned his head to Bahram. "Understood." Chapter 1180. Once all of this was done, Wang Chong turned his head and narrowed his eyes at the two men on the walls of Khorasan. Abu Muslim, Ziyad, I've already given you a chance. Since you're not willing to surrender, I'll fulfill your wish. You will live and die with this city. After saying this, Wang Chong closed his eyes and became motionless. The army of 200,000 behind him also remained motionless, as if they were statues. But the more this was the case, the more uneasy the two men on the walls became. No one knew what Wang Chong was up to. Ziyad, confirm it again. We can't let what happened in Samarkand happen again. Put the city gates under martial law. If you see any Sassanid approaching, kill them all. In addition, has the news reached Baghdad? When will our reinforcements arrive? Abu Muslim turned to Ziyad and said, Khorasan was the last gate of Arabia in the east. Once Khorasan was lost, the Arab capital of Baghdad would be threatened. The two were only 2,000 some kilometers apart, and it would take only a few days to reach the city. In the history of the Arabian Empire's constant expansion and conquest, this was the first time it had been forced to such a close distance. This was the reason why Abu Muslim had chosen to remain in Khorasan instead of fleeing west. I've already confirmed that all the gates are heavily guarded, so there won't be any problems. The news has also been sent to Baghdad, but the nobles in the capital are in disarray. In addition, in the previous battle, the soldiers of Cairo, Qutayba, and our own soldiers have all been mobilized from the eastern half of the empire. We have no soldiers to use at the moment. Although there are other governors and soldiers, they won't be able to get here in a short time. The soldiers closest to us will need more than half a month to get here, and they don't have many soldiers. Even if they get here, they won't be a match for them, Ziyad sincerely said. Ziyad sincerely said. As he spoke, his gaze swept over the 200,000 soldiers of the Tang dynasty, Khorasan, and various other factions. Every time he looked at them, Ziyad would be stunned. At the start of the war between the Arabs and the Tang dynasty, they had only had 110,000 soldiers, but now, not only had their numbers not decreased, they had increased, reaching an astonishing number of nearly 200,000. Furthermore, the strength of this army was extraordinary. They stood in formation outside the city, surging with killing intent. The rebels and remnants of the dynasty that Abu Muslim and Tang Walin had been unable to find were now borrowing the power of the Tang dynasty to emerge like bamboo shoots after a spring rain. This was something that Abu Muslim and Ziyad had never imagined. Abu Muslim's heart sank at Ziyad's words. At this moment, he could only rely on himself. The only reassuring thing was that as long as nothing happened to the city gate, he still had time to wait for other reinforcements to arrive. Something's wrong. As he stared at the army outside the city, Abu Muslim's eyes suddenly widened as a thought flashed through his mind. Something strange. There must be something else that we haven't noticed. Ziyad, take some people and investigate again. If you find any Khorasani spies, kill them all. Abu Muslim was currently on high alert, and he would rather kill the wrong person than let them go. Khorasan was far too important. If it fell, even if he managed to survive, he would be no different from dying. But, my lord, if the Tang people want to occupy Khorasan, they can only break through the walls. The gates are under our control, so how could they get in? Moreover, we've recruited 30,000 soldiers. Even if the Khorasani have spies in the city, they won't be able to shake us. Could they just drop from the sky? Ziyad couldn't help but say, drop from the sky? Abu Muslim's eyes widened at Ziyad's words. He seemed to have grasped onto something, but he couldn't immediately sort it out. For a moment, time seemed to stop. As Abu Muslim was thinking, a massive boom came from the southeast of Khorasan. At that moment, countless soldiers began to roar and roar. Bang! Abu Muslim's eyes lit up, and then his eyes lit up. Bang! 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 Buzz! Abu Muslim's body shuddered at the sounds of battle, and he felt like he had been struck by lightning. He finally knew what was wrong. Wang Chong and his people might not be able to drop from the sky like birds, but they could break out of the ground. The Tang people might not be familiar with this place and could not dig out such a massive tunnel in such a short amount of time, but the Sassanid people might not be able to do so. Most importantly, This place used to be the royal capital of the Sassanid dynasty. Damn it. At this moment, Abu Muslim's face twisted into a nasty grimace. He knew that he had still underestimated Wang Chong. But before Abu Muslim could react, a heaven-shaking roar came from outside the city. The 200,000 soldiers who had been motionless this entire time suddenly charged out, their cries shaking the heavens. Just as the two of them watched, a huge metal machine was suddenly pushed forward from behind. Fire! Amidst the army, Su Hanshan waved his arm, and the sharp metal anchors that Zhang Shouji had hurriedly manufactured flew out of long metal tubes and toward the top of the city walls. Ding ding ding! In the blink of an eye, these sharp anchors, dragging long ropes behind them, were firmly planted on the walls of the city. Flying cannon shackles. These were weapons that Zhang Shouji had ordered his craftsmen to produce on his journey west. Although he had been pressed for time, as a master of construction, Zhang Shouji had managed to produce quite a few flying cannon shackles in a short time. These weapons were simple in structure and only required great flexibility and firepower. To Zhang Shouji, who had thoroughly studied the secrets of ballistae, this was no problem at all. After removing the unnecessary complexity and leaving only the necessary parts, the flying cannon shackles had been completed. Go! Everyone prepare to climb the walls. Following the order, countless soldiers immediately climbed up the city wall along the ropes like monkeys. Everyone attack the walls. Clang! With a heaven-shaking sword cry, Bahram pulled out his wood steel sword and pointed it at the heavens. The 8,000-some Aswaran cataphracts had been secretly sent into Khorasan through the tunnels that the Sassanid dynasty had established. This was how the Khorasani royal family and the Aswaran cataphracts had managed to escape from the Arabs, vanishing without a trace. And now, they had become an important tool for the Khorasani to counterattack the Arabs. Hurry and stop them. Cut the anchors and the ropes. We can't let them climb up. On the walls, the Arabs were in a panic, all of them beginning to hack at the flying cannon shackles. Hurry! Abu Muslim roared in fury at this sight. Boom! With a thought, a pitch-black energy exploded out of his body. Clang clang clang. 10-some sharp flying cannons were pulverized by Abu Muslim's shockwaves. Ah, Abu Muslim, there's no need to waste your energy. You've already lost this battle. At this moment, Wang Chong heartily laughed, and then he stomped down, his stellar energy exploding. With a dragon roar, he transformed into a massive golden dragon that coiled around the walls of Khorasan and began to rapidly ascend. Leaping dragon art. Even now, when Wang Chong used the same technique at different levels of cultivation, the difference in power was like the difference between the heavens and the earth. The walls of Khorasan soared into the clouds, making it impossible to fly up. But the leaping dragon art that Wang Chong used was completely different. Bang! Just when the first leaping dragon art was about to be unleashed, Wang Chong stomped his right foot on the back of his left foot. There was a clattering of metal, and a visible ripple of air erupted from beneath Wang Chong's foot. Meanwhile, Wang Chong borrowed this repulsive force to once more coiled around the walls of Khorasan. Once, twice, thrice. In just a few seconds, before anyone could react, Wang Chong was already on the edge of the walls of Khorasan. Great yin-yang heaven creation art. Wang Chong's expression was cold and aloof as his voice resounded through the heavens. At the same time, a light even more dazzling than the sun erupted from his body. In the blink of an eye, Wang Chong had transformed into a blazing red sun in the sky above Khorasan. Ah! As soon as this dazzling red sun appeared, a series of blood-curdling screams rang out. The Arab soldiers on the walls had no time to react before their bodies began to seethe with blood, seeping through their pores and surging toward Wang Chong. 20 to 30 Arab soldiers furiously hacking at the flying cannons were instantly sucked dry of their blood, their flesh withered, and they dropped to the ground. And the effects of Wang Chong's great yin-yang heaven creation art were not limited to just this. "Milord, watch out!" At the same time, Ziad cried out in alarm. Even though Ziad was doing his utmost to resist, the blood energy in his body was still being forced out of his body by Wang Chong's great yin-yang heaven creation art. Abu Muslim was in a similar situation. When Wang Chong broke into the Imperial Great General level, he had advanced by leaps and bounds, reaching the peak of the Imperial General level. His strength had reached an unbelievable level, and he was also extremely familiar with the various martial arts. His grasp and understanding of the great yin-yang heaven creation art was enough to make all experts tremble in fear. Abu Muslim and Ziyad had already recovered the majority of their strength, but they were still no match for Wang Chong. Damn it! Abu Muslim's eyes widened. Wang Chong had appeared far too quickly, appearing on the walls in just a few seconds. Get out of my way! Black energy gathered around Abu Muslim's body, and like steel, he slammed it at Wang Chong. As he attacked, he rapidly retreated. Chapter 1181. Abu Muslim, it's useless. Even Qutayba has died in battle. Do you think that you can still fight me as an equal? With a thought from Wang Chong, the air in a radius of several dozen feet began to shudder, all the air under Wang Chong's control fiercely surging and churning. An enormous attractive force emerged from Wang Chong's body, pulling on the thick walls of Khorasan and pulling him toward the top of the walls. Great destruction art. Without the slightest hesitation, Wang Chong immediately used the strongest technique of the great yin-yang heaven creation art. The entire world became deathly still, all light distorting. From a distance, it seemed like the walls of Khorasan had been plunged into darkness, and in the depths of this darkness was the most terrifying energy of destruction. Not good. With this shout, Abu Muslim and Ziyad began to tremble, expressions of extreme shock on their faces. Ocean Ring. Asmodee's fury. In the blink of an eye, the two of them were both shocked and enraged, and they both unleashed their most powerful techniques. Rumble. 3 enormous floods of energy collided in the air, resulting in a heaven-shaking boom. 2 screams rang out as Abu Muslim and Ziyad were sent flying like ragdolls. At the same time, with a thought, Wang Chong leaped over the wall like a hawk. His body twisted in midair and steadily landed on the wall. Thump thump thump. A series of footsteps resounded in Wang Chong's ears, and Abu Muslim was forced back 6 or 7 steps before he was able to stabilize himself. Not far from him, plush. Ziyad's chest trembled and he vomited blood, his face pale. He raised his head to look at Wang Chong, who had descended like a demon god, and a hint of despair appeared in his eyes. He knew that Wang Chong was strong, but he never imagined that Wang Chong was strong to such an extent that they were no match for him even after joining forces. How is this possible? How could a person advance by leaps and bounds in such a short period of time? No one can be like this Tang people and possess such terrifying strength. Ziyad sensed the waves of pain in his body, his eyes ashen. From breaking into the great general realm to reaching the peak, everyone had spent many years and months, but Wang Chong had used only a few days to accomplish this astonishing transformation. Even thinking about it now, Ziyad still felt incredibly shocked. All of this caused one to feel a deep sense of despair. Abu Muslim, it's all over. This is your final destination. Give me your life. Wang Chong's eyes were sharp as his resounding voice resounded through the heavens. This war had begun because of Abu Muslim, because of Arabia's greed for the Tang dynasty, and in the end, it would end with the two of them. Boom! Without the slightest hesitation, an enormous wave of psychic energy surged through the air, splitting into 2 and stabbing into the minds of Abu Muslim and Ziyad like the sharpest of spears. As their minds were shaken by Wang Chong's interference, the air rumbled and the halo under Wang Chong's feet shuddered. Golden stellar energy surged out of his body, filling the heavens with a momentum that could topple mountains and topple seas as it rumbled toward Abu Muslim and Ziyad. Before Wang Chong's attack could even land, the sturdy walls beneath their feet began to crumble and cave in, a spiderweb of cracks appearing. The entire city of Khorasan began to hum and tremble, completely unable to endure this dreadful attack. Even Abu Muslim and Ziyad grimaced at this sight. The strength Wang Chong had displayed had completely surpassed theirs, a strength that could make one despair. Bang! A hint of determination flashed through Abu Muslim's eyes, and with a thought, he stomped down on the ground and charged at Wang Chong, his energy surging. But Abu Muslim had only just begun to attack when a burst of energy collided with him from behind and sent him flying. "Milord, run. I'll stop him." Before Abu Muslim could react, Ziad was already charging at Wang Chong, his eyes bloodshot and a look of resolve on his face. He could not escape. After this continuous battle, his injuries were far more severe than Abu Muslim's. Moreover, Ziad knew that Wang Chong would never allow him to escape. In his current condition, his chances of escaping alive were minuscule. Moreover, Qutayba was dead, Ibak was dead, Osman was dead, and in the end, if even his commanding officer, Abu Muslim, was killed in battle, the caliph would have no choice but to kill him and bury him with the rest of the governors. "Milord, we've fought side by side for 10-some years, and you've always taken care of me. This time, let me take care of Milord. At the very least, if Milord survives, you will have a chance to avenge me and Lord Qutayba." Ziad's hair danced in the howling winds as he stared at Wang Chong, his fists clenched tightly. "Tang people, I'll fight you to the death." Ziad roared, and without the slightest hesitation, he flicked his wrist. The ocean ring immediately began to churn up thousands of black torrents that surged toward Wang Chong from all sides. "You overestimate yourself." Wang Chong coldly snorted. His body vibrated with golden light and boomed like a tide, shattering Ziad's attack with a single blow. Before anyone else could react, Wang Chong had already closed in, his 5 fingers gripping Ziad's neck like a pair of iron pincers, sealing off all his stellar energy and slowly lifting him off the ground. With the ocean ring and the power of his ritual tool, Ziad was on par with Cheng Qianli in his supreme desolation god form. 7 or 8 days ago, when Wang Chong had yet to become a great general, Ziad might have been able to put up a fight against him. But now, Ziad was simply too naive to think that he could contend against him. But surprisingly, Ziad, with his vitals under Wang Chong's control and his life in Wang Chong's hands, didn't seem to care at all. He used all his strength to let out a heart-rending roar. "Milord, run." This roar was like a clap of thunder, shaking the souls of many people. Even Wang Chong was taken aback. He had never imagined that the Arabs, famed for their savagery and cruelty, would have someone like Ziad. At the last moment, Abu Muslim was not thinking of himself, but of Ziad, completely disregarding his own death. 10-some zhang away, Abu Muslim had been about to charge at Wang Chong, but when he heard this roar, his body trembled and his mind began to churn in great waves. "Ziad!" Abu Muslim's teeth were clenched so tightly that they were about to shatter. "Run!" Ziad harshly said. "Kill!" At this moment, not far from Abu Muslim, a Tang dynasty warrior used the flying chains to scale the walls, and behind him, more and more people began to climb the walls. "Charge with me! Open the gates!" Meanwhile, Khorasan was in turmoil, the clashing of swords and sabers as more and more Khorasani entered the city through the tunnels. The 8,000 Aswaran cataphracts that the Arabs had been searching for this entire time had appeared in front of Abu Muslim in a way that no one could have imagined, and they were rapidly charging toward the city gates. Abu Muslim could see that Gao Xianji, Cheng Qianli, and the evil emperor were also making their way over. The situation was hopeless. At this moment, Abu Muslim understood that whether he was willing or not, whether he stayed or not, Khorasan was fated to fall. Even someone as iron-blooded as Abu Muslim couldn't help but let out a tragic roar. "Wang Chong, Gao Xianji, the grudge between us will not end here. There will come a day when my soldiers will reach the walls and truly set foot on the lands of the Central Plains." With these words, Abu Muslim leaped off the wall and flew off like a bolt of lightning. An Aswaran cataphract saw Abu Muslim and charged forward, but he was sent flying 50 to 60 zhang by Abu Muslim's palm. Before his body could even hit the ground, his famed Aswaran cataphract had been shattered into countless pieces. Abu Muslim, you won't get the chance." Wang Chong sneered, activating the great yin-yang heaven creation art as he snapped Ziad's neck. Wang Chong had no pity for these enemies of the Tang dynasty. As invaders, they had to be prepared to pay a price if their invasion failed. Abu Muslim's group had only been forced into desperate straits. If these two had won, they would have had a completely different and savage appearance, and what awaited the Tang dynasty would have been nothing more than a tragic loss of territory. Sympathizing with the enemy is being cruel to yourself. Zid, go in peace. Abu Muslim will soon join you. Wang Chong glanced at Ziyad's corpse and coldly said. Wang Chong made a gesture, and a group of Tang dynasty soldiers quickly slid down the walls and began to head toward the eastern gate of Khorasan. In the distance, 10 some Iswaran cataphracts urged their horses forward and began to ride toward the gate. Rumble. A few moments later, there was a heaven-shaking boom as the sturdy gate of Khorasan slowly opened. Khorasan had been formally breached. How about it? Do you want to give chase? Chapter 1182. There's no need. Wang Chong and Gao Xianji stood side by side, gazing at the thick plumes of smoke rising from the walls of Khorasan. If someone like Abu Muslim wants to escape, it will be very difficult for us to find him in such a large city. Moreover, our next step is not to fight or kill a single person, but to consider the overall situation. General Cheng, have you prepared the letter I told you about? It was prepared a long time ago. With Shi holding the brush, it can be sent to Baghdad by the Arabian hunting falcons at any time. A voice came from behind. Cheng Qianli tapped lightly on the top of the city wall and quickly caught up. A top-class great general would always consider the outcome of a battle, but Wang Chong did not just consider the situation on the battlefield, but also the overall situation outside the battlefield. His vision and plans were enough to make the other great generals of the continent pale in comparison. This was also why Cheng Qianli admired him. The army quickly surged in. Without Abu Muslim and Ziyad to guard the city, the tens of thousands of soldiers collapsed and were wiped out faster than ever before. Only 4 hours had passed from the opening of the gate to the entrance of the army. Wang Chong and his army had completely taken over this strategic city at the western end of the Silk Road. This is the Tigris River? On the western side of Khorasan, on the high walls, Wang Chong, Gao Xianji, Cheng Qianli, Li Sai, Wan Shuyang, and Bahram all ascended to the top of the walls. Standing on the eastern wall of Khorasan, Wang Chong could see at a glance that a vast river was surging through the city. This river was 50 to 60 zhang wide and extremely deep. Although the water flowed rapidly, it was not as turbid as imagined. For the first time in Wang Chong's life, he saw one of the two most famous rivers of the Sassanid dynasty west of the Tsong Mountains, the Tigris and the Euphrates. This was the source of the Sassanid dynasty civilization and also the most important river of the Arabian Empire. This is only a tributary of the Tigris River. The main branch of this river is even wider and grander than what you see. Our Sassanid people were able to nurture several thousand years of history and become the strongest country on the coast precisely because of these two rivers. But now, they have both fallen into the hands of the Arabian Empire. They have even imposed heavy taxes on anyone who crosses these two rivers. Our Sassanids cannot travel east or west without these two rivers. Every year, they take an incalculable amount of wealth and send it to the Arab treasury. Bahram sighed. Wang Chong silently listened, a few thoughts flitting through his mind, but he quickly calmed down. History had changed significantly from what Wang Chong remembered. At the very least, in Wang Chong's memories, there were no tributaries of the Tigris River outside Khorasan. Wang Chong's gaze paused on this famed river of the West and Arabia for a few moments, and then he slowly raised his head and gazed into the distance. Wang Chong could faintly see an enormous capital. This was the center of the Western continent's politics, power, culture, and military. Baghdad. This thought flitted through Wang Chong's mind. Abu Muslim had wanted to break through Talas and occupy the western regions. Ironically, in the end, Abu Muslim had not been able to threaten Chong. Instead, Wang Chong had marched westward, penetrating deep into Arabia and following the Silk Road to reach Khorasan, the city at the end of the Silk Road. General Cheng, begin. Wang Chong continued to look forward, not even turning his head. Yes. A few moments after Cheng Qianli spoke, an Arabian hunting falcon soared into the sky, flying toward the capital of the Arabian Empire, Baghdad. More than 2,200 kilometers, This was already a very close distance, starting from Khorasan, crossing the Tigris River and Euphrates River, and traveling west for another 1,300 kilometers, one would reach the core of the Arabian Empire. This was a majestic city, its towers and domed palaces so densely packed together that they reached into the heavens. This small place was home to many soldiers, millions of civilians, and countless merchants. The economy, culture, and politics were all extremely developed. This was Baghdad, the largest center of the Arabian Empire. On the western border, it had another resounding name, Sleepless City. Everyone in this city celebrated day and night, and it was called the Sleepless City. Suddenly, a shrill cry came from the sky. An enormous Arabian hunting falcon spread its wings, its feathers trembling as it descended from the sky like an arrow. Wrapped in a gust of wind, it flew into the imperial palace at the highest point of Baghdad. Rumble! But unbeknownst to anyone, this Arabian hunting falcon's descent into the imperial palace was like a boulder crashing into the ground, sending massive waves through the empire. Bastard! A thunderous roar resounded through the imperial palace at the highest point of Baghdad, causing countless governors, generals, and nobles to kneel on the ground, their bodies trembling in fear. At the highest point of the palace, seated on a golden throne, the Caliph of the Arabian Empire, Mu'tasim III, dressed in a white robe of silver silk and wearing a golden crown, his eyes spitting out thunderous flames. As the sovereign of the Abbasid Caliphate, Mu'tasim III was hailed as the greatest sovereign in the history of the Abbasid Caliphate. Under his rule, the Abbasid Caliphate had destroyed countless factions, and the empire's territory had been expanded to an unprecedented level of prosperity. Countless famous ministers, generals, and ministers, millions of elite cavalry and powerful armies were all waiting for him, ready to conquer the world for him at any time. It would not be an exaggeration to say that he was one of the most powerful rulers in the world. But at this moment, all this glory had vanished into thin air. The behemoth army had been destroyed, the skyquaking army had been dealt a heavy blow, Qutayba had been killed in battle, Aybak had been killed, Osman had been killed, the Mamelukes had been destroyed. He had heard far too much grievous news in this period. Mu'tasim III had originally held great expectations for this eastern campaign, hoping to use his enormous army to conquer the east and unify the continent, accomplishing an unprecedented feat, but now, all his hopes had been shattered. Not only that, a great general of the Eastern infidel had arrived at his gates and threatened his Baghdad. Moreover, this enemy had put forth an extremely excessive demand. This was a terrible humiliation that Mu'tasim III could not endure. Your Majesty, these Tang people have only given us 3 days to reply, but carrier pigeons require 2 days. If we do not receive a reply or refuse their demands, they will immediately take action. They will cross the Tigris River and head west to capture even more cities. This will cause the entire empire to panic, which will be extremely detrimental to the empire. An Arab minister dressed in jewels kneeled on the ground and fearfully spoke. Useless thing. We have so many soldiers, so many governors and generals. Would we be threatened by a single infidel? Pass on our decree. Exterminate these Tang people and the remnants of the dynasty. Mu'tasim III was like an enraged lion, his voice ringing with fury. Bizizi. The hall was deathly still, everyone kneeling on the ground, their heads bowed to the ground. Why aren't you speaking? Speak. We have so many soldiers and generals. Are we incapable of exterminating a trifling army of 200,000? Mu'tasim III angrily rebuked. Your Majesty. In the previous battles, we sent all our soldiers to Talas in Cairo, the north, and the east, totaling nearly 500,000 soldiers. After the defeat at Talas, we were almost completely wiped out. Right now, our entire eastern region has no soldiers to use. An Arab general stammered. Not only that, Qutayba and Abu Muslim have always been the strongest governors of the empire. The number of people in the empire that can compare to them can be counted on one's fingers. Even if we send soldiers now, we will find it very difficult to defeat them. Moreover, gathering soldiers is not something that can be done in 3 to 5 days. But if we do not immediately agree to the demands of those infidels, they will immediately cross the Tigris River and attack all the other cities, perhaps even Baghdad. Another general mustered up his courage and said, "Crack." Just as the two of them finished speaking, a crisp sound suddenly rang out in the hall. Mutasim III's 5 fingers tightened, and the armrest of the throne in his right hand was instantly crushed to pieces. His originally fair face became extremely red. As the strongest monarch in the history of the Arabian Empire, this was the first time he had been forced into a situation where he had no soldiers to use. 1 billion taels of gold, 1 billion taels. Do all of you mean that we should agree to that madman of the East, accept his extortion, and give them so much wealth? Mutasim III's expression was furious, his eyes gloomy. 1 billion taels of gold. Even though Arabia was as wealthy as a country, having plundered the treasures of countless kingdoms and factions over the past several hundred years, accumulating an enormous amount of wealth, this was still an enormous sum to the Arabs. But your majesty, if we do not agree, we will lose far more than 1 billion taels of gold. They can advance east from Khorasan and conquer many territories. With 200,000 soldiers and those skilled Eastern great generals, we won't be able to resist them in a short time. In the end, even if we drive them out of the empire, we will still suffer grievous losses. Your Highness, an Arab noble said in a trembling voice. The cities of the east were in peril, but the 200,000 soldiers had remained in Khorasan, waiting to move out. This was even more shocking than a true attack. Using several dozen cities of the Arabian Empire as a threat and using the name of war reparations to demand a price of 1 billion taels of gold was simply unprecedented. Not even in the Arabian Empire's endless conquests had such a thing been heard of. Chapter 1183. Boom. The Arab noble had barely finished speaking when a golden war boot emerged from the throne. As everyone looked on in awe, Mutasim III suddenly stood up from his throne. At that moment, the world swayed, and the vast city of Baghdad seemed unable to endure this power and fiercely shuddered. We will not submit to anyone's threats. Even if all the cities of the East are destroyed and all the people slaughtered, we will not submit to the extortion of an Eastern madman. Let him take the 1 billion taels himself. Even if we have to pay half the city, we will personally tear him to pieces. Mutasim III's rage was unquenchable, and his eyes were like bolts of lightning, exuding intimidating light. In the face of the furious caliph, everyone kept quiet out of fear, no one daring to say a word. In the Arabian Empire, the caliph's word was law. Once he made a decision, no one could stop him, much less defy him. If I were His Majesty, I would give away the 1 billion taels of gold right now. Just as the atmosphere reached a freezing point, a hoarse and mysterious voice suddenly rang out from outside the hall. Hearing this voice, everyone's body shook violently. The caliph's word was law. No one had expected that someone would anger His Majesty at a time like this. But a moment later, just when everyone was stunned by this person's boldness, there was a flash of light as a slanted figure shot into the hall. At some point, a tall figure shrouded in a black robe had appeared at the entrance to the hall. His pitch-black robe was embroidered with mysterious runes using golden threads. High Priest! A noble of the Arabian Empire trembled at the sight of this figure, his eyes going wide. No one had expected that this mysterious person who dared to contradict the caliph would be the most enigmatic person in the empire, the high priest who wielded the divine authority. This was definitely the most unexpected guest of the imperial palace. As a legendary existence that had existed for centuries in the empire, although almost no one had ever seen the high priest before, they all recognized the unique sun god robe and the black temple scepter in his hand. One of the high priest's skinny hands reached out from his sleeves like a bird's claw and grabbed the black scepter's power. Rolling black mist kept coming out from his sleeves. His hat was lowered, completely concealing his face. He only stood there, motionless, but not a single one of the governors, generals, and nobles in the hall could sense the depth of his cultivation. Although he had truly appeared in front of everyone, they could not sense anything other than the black scepter. It was as if there was nothing there. Buzz! In the blink of an eye, the high priestess's long robe fluttered as she stepped over the threshold and entered. "High priest, why have you come?" To Mutasim III's surprise, the enraged Arab caliph Mutasim III was like a punctured balloon, all his anger vanishing. Not only was he not enraged, he was even pleasantly surprised. Boom boom boom, he excitedly descended from the hall and personally went to welcome Wang Chong. Everyone in Arabia knew of the caliph's attitude toward the high priest. But only at this moment did they realize just how much importance His Majesty placed on him. The defeat at Talas, the death of Qutayba, and the arrival of the Tang people at Khorasan to intimidate Baghdad. How could I not come for such a major event? The high priest said faintly as he walked forward slowly. As he walked, the air seemed to turn into waves. Translucent ripples that were visible to the naked eye spread out from his feet. It was as if he was walking on water. Not only that, when the high priest walked forward, even his figure became faint, like a transparent ripple of water. It was as if the person passing by them was not a real person, but a faint ripple of water. Swoosh! In a flash, everyone retreated to the sides, and even the governors had to lower their heads to make way. The governors' cultivation bases were also different. With their abilities, they couldn't even sense the breath of the high priestess. They could only feel a thick darkness that seemed to be devouring everything, causing them to feel fear and awe. A few moments later, the high priest stopped in front of the caliph. He did not bow, nor did he show the respect a subject should have. He exuded an aura that transcended the authority of the empire. From a certain perspective, this was an offense against the caliph. But the caliph seemed to not care at all. Not only that, the caliph seemed to be even more respectful toward the high priest. "High priest, you've come at just the right time. We have so many soldiers and so many generals. Do you think that we will be threatened by a teenager from the east? Arabia lives on war, and no soldier has ever surrendered. We still have half of the country and 1 million elites. Do we have to submit to the Tang people of the east?" The caliph strode up to the high priest. "It's just 1 billion taels of gold. Does your majesty lack money?" The high priest did not answer. Instead, he asked about something else. Although 1 billion taels is an extremely large sum, the empire has saved up for centuries. It is still possible to produce such a sum. The caliph slightly raised his head, his eyes disdainful and his face brimming with pride. 1 billion taels of gold was an astronomical sum to many dynasties, countries, and even large empires. When Wang Chong requested the imperial court to send reinforcements for the Battle of Talas, the Bureau of Personnel had only given him 20 million taels of gold. At the time, the imperial court had already felt that it was a lot. And 1 billion taels of gold was 50 times the amount that Wang Chong had used to launch the Battle of Talas, enough to buy several cities. But to the Arabian Empire, this was not an unbearable sum. This was the advantage of being a marauder. Every time he won a country, he would plunder everything from it. In this aspect, the Tang dynasty, which was bound by etiquette and righteousness, could not compare. But to rely on the strength of a single country to create wealth comparable to that of Arabia was something that only the Central Plains could do. "I can produce 1 billion taels of gold, but I cannot accept the conditions of these Easterners and submit to them." The caliph's eyes were sharp as he firmly declared. This was no longer a matter of money. To accept the Tang people's conditions was to submit, to be humiliated. As the highest commander of the empire, the caliph could not tolerate such a thing. "It's just 1 billion taels of gold. How can this be considered submission? Does your majesty intend to surrender without a fight?" The high priest indifferently said, his expression unruffled. Only the high priest could dare to speak to the supreme caliph in such a manner, as if he was above imperial authority, and yet the caliph did not rebuke him. How could this be? The caliph was stunned at first, but then he immediately rejected the idea. "We still have many soldiers in the southern war zone, the western war zone, and the other war zones. These soldiers can all be mobilized. It's just a trifling army of 200,000. Once we mobilize the army, all that awaits them will be death." The caliph clenched his fists, his voice seething with killing intent. Arabia was a country of war, and he was also the sovereign of war. This was the reason for his rage. That Eastern Tang dynasty commander called Wang Chong had actually sent a letter to threaten them. If they did not reply within 3 days, he would pay 1 billion taels of gold as compensation, and they would immediately continue eastward and occupy more cities. To Mutasim III, who had always been known for his unyielding character and had a deep influence on his governors and generals, this was a public provocation and humiliation. This was also the reason for the caliph's rage. Moreover, even though Qutayba and Ibak had died in battle, they had only lost 2 of their best soldiers. Arabia still had many of its best fighters. Isn't that so? Since His Majesty still has many soldiers and is preparing for an even larger war, how can this be considered a surrender? With His Majesty's abilities, gold and silver are nothing in his eyes. 1 billion taels of gold is only used to appease the Tang people. It's said that the Tang dynasty is famed for its benevolence and righteousness. Once they receive the money, they will keep their promises. His Majesty only needs to temporarily appease them. Once the army arrives, he will be able to protect the cities west of the Tigris River from their attacks, and he will also be able to break into Khorasan and wipe out the Tang people and the rebel army in one fell swoop. And he will also be able to retrieve the gold. The high priest's raspy and deep voice resounded in everyone's ears. 1 billion taels of gold is no small sum. Even if they spur their horses at full speed, they won't be able to get very far. Once we break into Khorasan, His Majesty can dispatch cavalry to pursue and retrieve the gold. Moreover, hasn't His Majesty been searching for the remnants of the conquered countries and the rebel army in the last few years without any results? We can use these Tang people to draw out the entire rebel army. Won't that be killing 2 birds with 1 stone and capturing them all in one fell swoop? Buzz. Hearing this, the Khalifa's expression shook and he suddenly raised his head. He had been driven mad by the compensation of 1 billion taels of gold, and in his desperation, he had never thought of anything else. It was true that the remnants of the dynasties and the rebel army had always been a sore point for Arabia. In the last 10-some years, the empire had expended a great deal of effort in searching for the traces of these rebels. The behemoth army, the Mamelukes, the skyquaking army, and even an Arab war god like Qutayba had been dispatched by Mutasim III to suppress the rebels. But the rebel army and the remnants of the dynasties had always been like rats. When the army arrived, they would hide like turtles. The moment the army left, they would come out and wreak havoc. Chapter 1184. This had always been Mutasim III's greatest worry, and there were even times when he found it hard to sleep at night. But now that he thought about it, although the Tang people had come with a fierce momentum, they had succeeded in drawing out all the hidden rebels and survivors. Just like the high priest had said, as long as he could pacify them and wait for the army to arrive, he might be able to wipe them all out in one fell swoop. If he could use this opportunity to wipe them out, then even if the Tang people seized his weak point and extorted 1 billion taels of gold, it would still be acceptable. This was truly killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Mutasim III's pupils constricted, and he instantly fell silent. His eyebrows moved slightly as he lowered his head, a thoughtful look appearing in his eyes. Huler, how long will it take for the soldiers to arrive? The Caliph of Arabia, Mutasim III, suddenly turned his head to look at the steel-like Arab governor kneeling on the ground. He had not said a single word this entire time. The empire's white corpse, Huler. Although he was not as powerful or as famous as the Arab war god Qutayba, he had forged his reputation through battle after battle. His skin was so pale that it made him seem like a corpse. But even so, in the eyes of the Arabian Empire and the surrounding countries, Huler's reputation was no less than that of the governor of Iron and Blood Abu Muslim. From a certain perspective, he was even more ruthless and bloodthirsty than Abu Muslim. Most of the opponents who had fallen into his hands had died horribly. Now that Qutayba had died in battle, the most famous governor that had been summoned to Baghdad was probably the empire's white corpse. If they wanted to deal with the 200,000 rebels and Tang soldiers in Khorasan, Huler would be the best commander. This was also why the Caliph Mutasim III had subconsciously asked him this question. Your Majesty, if we are fast, we can gather the army in 7 days. But these are all ordinary soldiers and cannot pose much of a threat to the thick walls of Khorasan. If we want to gather enough soldiers and top-class great generals to completely destroy the enemy army in Khorasan, we will need 15 to 20 days. Hewler thought for a few moments before finally standing up. We'll march through the night. In 10 days at most, the entire army must reach Khorasan. I will not permit these eastern infidels to remain in Khorasan for another day. The Caliph of Arabia, Mutasim III, turned his head and spoke in an unquestionable tone. Yes, sir. Hewler only hesitated for a moment before saying without the slightest hesitation. Time was short, and it was almost impossible to gather enough soldiers from the other Arab war zones to reach Khorasan in time. Although the Empire's White Corps, Hewler was pressed for time and the mission was arduous. As long as the army marched day and night, it was not impossible. Moreover, it would only require a few casualties. Because to Hewler, these were not his concerns. Rumble. The bitter defeat in the east, the death of Qutayba, the fall of Khorasan, and Wang Chang's threats, all of these events had enraged the Arabian Empire and caused it to mobilize its soldiers. Not only did the atmosphere of war not weaken, it became even more intense. Lord Protector General, the next Arab city is only several dozen li from us, and the defenses there are weak. As long as we are willing, our 200,000 soldiers can cross the Tigris River and occupy that city without shedding a single drop of blood. General Bahram also said that if we go west from there are 10 some cities, and the land between the cities is flat with no natural defenses. If we want to, we can quickly occupy these Arabian territories. Why has Milord stopped at this time and ordered the army to rest? In the domed hall of Khorasan, the fourth commander of the Anshi Protectorate Army, Lu Shi, couldn't help but ask. The palaces of the Arabs were magnificent, their domed roofs covered in all sorts of delicate vine-like carvings, and their marble floors were completely different from those of the Central Plains. There were even many pearls and agate embedded in the floor, a luxurious sight to behold. But at this moment, whether it was Gao Xianji, Cheng Qianli, Shi Yuanqin, Li Sai, the Black Armored Guard, Su Hanshan, Xue Qianjun, or anyone else in the hall, all of them focused on Wang Chong. If they were willing, they could take over 10 some Arab cities at their fingertips, but Wang Chong had stopped at a time like this. None of them could understand why. Let me ask all of you, we've been marching west from Talas to Samarkand, and then to Khorasan, suffering so many casualties. Just why? Is it just for war? Wang Chong faintly smiled. Everyone in the hall was stunned by these words. No one had expected Wang Chong to ask this question. Most of the people in the hall were generals. As generals, weren't they born for war? Wasn't the purpose of their existence to win this war? At this moment, everyone couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. Wang Chong silently smiled as he took in everyone's reactions. War was an art. It was a method, not an end. In every battle, one had to understand its goal and meaning. This was how one considered war on a strategic level. Judging from the reactions of the people in the hall, this concept of war clearly surpassed that of this era. The duty of a general is to win the war, but we've already defeated the Arabs, so do we still need to continue fighting? We've already lost more than 100,000 soldiers. Do we need to fight to the last man? Wang Chong swept his gaze over the crowd. Everyone was momentarily speechless at Wang Chong's words. Although the war between the Tang dynasty and Arabia had ended with the Tang dynasty's victory, even pushing all the way to Khorasan and into the heart of the Arabian Empire, not far from the imperial capital of Baghdad, directly threatening this massive empire, the Tang dynasty had also paid an enormous price. A general should lead the army to victory. If this wasn't the duty of a soldier, what else could it be? The goal of war was not to kill, nor was it to fight for the sake of fighting. Everything was for profit. Only when there was profit to be gained could a war continue, could it be of use to the people of the country and not become a burden. Throughout history, it was precisely because wars were purely about killing that they were criticized for being overly aggressive and even dragging down the entire country. Emperor Wu of Han fought in the north and south, his accomplishments in both administration and martial arts unparalleled in the world. He was hailed as the eternal emperor, but in his later years he was criticized for his shortcomings, resulting in the weakening of the country. War involves many aspects, and it is extremely vast. Manpower, resources, weapons, soldiers, and rations are all extremely costly, so the Confucians have attacked in every possible way. This is the reason why it is said that civil and military officials despise each other and that civil and military officials do not get along. If a war does not bring benefits to the empire, no one will support it. Wang Chong sternly said to the people behind him. The conflicts between the civil and military officials had existed for a very long time, spanning through history and dynasties. Each time they erupted, the imperial court would be shaken, and even an empire might collapse. If one carefully examined the issue, the root cause was not the difference between the civil and military officials, nor was it because the civil officials were refined while the military officials were crude. The root cause was that a war could not bring any benefits to an empire. It was not just the civil officials. In the eyes of everyone else, war was a kind of consumption. It consumed war horses, livestock, rations, and countless lives. Everything about it was negative. Once a war broke out on the border, the generals would go on a long expedition and launch a defensive counterattack. In the end, they would defeat the enemy and obtain victory, but they would not lose points, not gain points. On the whole, the army and war would always give people a negative impression, always accompanied by death. Or to put it another way, once a war began, it meant that soldiers and rations were being wantonly collected, causing panic among the people. But if war could bring benefits, enormous benefits that benefited the common people, then everything would be different. Chapter 1185. In addition, we have another option, which is to give up on the other cities and head straight for the Arabian capital of Baghdad. With our abilities, we should be able to reach the vicinity of Baghdad by more than 2,200 kilometers. Although they might not be able to take that city, they were more than enough to threaten the Arabian capital and shake the entire Arabian Empire, leaving them with the most humiliating mark in history. Not even 1 billion taels of gold would be enough to buy back this humiliation. In addition, if my guess is correct, the Arabs will most likely pretend to agree to our request and send over 1 billion taels of gold to buy time for the other armies to think of a way to defeat us. Thus, no matter what, they will. Wang Chong's expression was confident, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 Jun. Wang Chong never fought a battle he was not confident in. While the threat of war and the demand for reparations were very novel in this world, they had long ago become the norm in the other world, and it had even led to the rapid rise of several peoples in that other world. War required profit, and this protracted war had lasted until now. Wang Chong needed a satisfactory number as an answer to present to all levels of society, including the people of the Tang dynasty. As if in response to Wang Chong's words, the flapping of wings rang out in everyone's ears. In the next moment, under everyone's gaze, a huge golden-beaked falcon flapped its wings and descended from the sky. It flew into the hall and landed on the long golden conference table in front of everyone. And on the falcon's leg was a particularly eye-catching rolled-up letter. Buzz. At the sight of this hunting falcon, the hall instantly fell into a deathly silence. Everyone's body trembled, and they revealed shocked expressions. A few of them even stood up. Would the Arabs really agree to 1 billion taels of gold? In that instant, everyone held their breath. Swish. A thin hand reached out from the side and took the letter from the leg of the Arabian hunting falcon. A few moments later, Yuan Shusong's expression became agitated. "Milord, the Arabs have agreed to 1 billion taels of gold. They've really agreed." "What?" A single stone caused 1,000 ripples. Hearing Wan Shuyang's words, everyone in the hall was shocked to the point of standing up. "Let me see." The Arab letter first landed in Gao Xianji's hands, and then Cheng Qianli, Shi Yuanqing, Lu Shi, Li Sai, and then everyone else in the hall. Other than Wan Shuyang, there were very few people in the hall who could recognize Arabic. This matter was far too shocking at Wang Chong's price of 1 billion taels of gold, and even more shocking at the Arabs' reaction. It was no longer important whether they could recognize the words on the letter or not. They were just confirming it through this method. Even for Gao Xianji, it was unimaginable for him to win 1 billion taels of gold in a war. Even the benefits he gained from attacking Stone Country were far from comparable to this. The difference between them was like clouds and mud in the face of a great wizard. Wang Chang's simple action instantly eclipsed all his previous actions. Wonderful! Cheng Qianli clenched his fists, his expression excited. No amount of words could compare to the impact of a single Arab letter. At this moment, everyone suddenly understood Wang Chang's strategic intentions. 1 billion taels of gold. If we write a memorial to the imperial court, no one in the court, including the civil and military officials, will dare to believe it. Even the civil officials, including the Bureau of Personnel, will have a completely different opinion of us. 1 billion taels of gold was an astronomical sum. Even a vice protector general like Cheng Qianli couldn't help but be moved. Many soldiers had died in the Battle of Talas, and just the compensation for their deaths was an enormous sum. Cheng Qianli had previously considered what he should do. As the leader of these soldiers who had died in battle, every general would protect their subordinates and fight for as many benefits as possible. But now, everything had been resolved. However, the Arabs have also put forward a few conditions in their letter. At this moment, a voice rang out beside his ear. Yuan Shusong frowned slightly and said thoughtfully, "You're right. According to the Arabs' conditions, they hope to sign a treaty with us in order to stop the war. The Arabs promise that they will no longer invade the Tang dynasty, but they hope that we will withdraw from Khorasan and return the territory between Khorasan and Samarkand to them. In addition, they will not threaten to attack any other cities." Buzz! The people in the room instantly fell silent at Wan Shuyang's words. They glanced at each other, none of them saying anything. From the perspective of the Tang dynasty, the Arabs' conditions were not impossible to agree to. Exchanging the territory that belonged to the Arabs for 1 billion taels of gold was not a bad deal. Moreover, the Tang dynasty had never fought all the way to Khorasan in the more than 1,000 years since the beginning of the Qin and Han dynasties. This was an unprecedented achievement. At the same time, it was not necessarily a good thing for the great Tang soldiers to be stuck here for a long time in unfamiliar territory. Object. A cold voice suddenly rang out. Su Hanshan suddenly opened his mouth and said with a cold and hard expression, "If we really agree to the Arabs' conditions, all our previous efforts will have been for naught. There is a first time for everything. We were able to occupy the unfamiliar western regions and operate until now, so we can also occupy Khorasan and firmly control it. No matter what, it's worth a try." "Of course not." Wang Chong heartily laughed. Right now, the Arabs coveted the Central Plains and were defeated by us, so they attacked Khorasan and besieged us. In this war, the Arabs are paying 1 billion taels of gold to compensate us for our losses. This is not some equal exchange. It seems like His Majesty Mutisim still doesn't understand his own situation, nor does he understand the attitude a loser should have. General Cheng, lead the army across the Tigris River and attack the closest city, Shandar. When we're about to occupy it, withdraw to Khorasan. Let them understand their situation." "Understood. Leave this matter to me." Cheng Qianli smiled. The development of this war had already surpassed the limits of his understanding, but Cheng Qianli had unreservedly trusted Wang Chong. Thus, no matter what Wang Chong said, he would carry it out without hesitation. After discussing a few more details about the defense of the city, the meeting concluded and the crowd quickly dispersed. "Wang Chong, the Arabs still have many experts. Do you really think that they will keep their promise?" Once everyone had left, only Wang Chong and Gao Xianji were left in the room. "Lord Protector General, you also said that the Arabs still have many intelligent people. How could they really negotiate peace with us? This is just a delaying tactic." Wang Chong firmly said. Arabia was a country of war that delighted in conquest. From the very start, Wang Chong had concluded that they would never truly negotiate peace, so how could there be a peace treaty? But Wang Chong wanted 1 billion taels of gold, and whether the Arabs were willing or not, they had to hand it over. Now was not the time for them to be begging for help. After leaving the conference hall, Wang Chong climbed onto the western wall of Khorasan and looked into the distance. Beyond the wall, he could hear the howling of the Tigris River. This wide river was a natural barrier, an invisible line of defense for Khorasan. From the moment he had first arrived at Khorasan and laid eyes on this river, Wang Chong had sensed its military value. From a certain perspective, Abu Muslim had been correct. Khorasan truly was extremely difficult to break. General, have you ever thought about how we should respond when the Caliph Mu'tasim III of Arabia sends hundreds of thousands of soldiers in a thunderous rage, as well as countless governors and generals? There will never be any true negotiation with the Arabs. Even if they agree, General will find it very difficult to retreat unscathed. A voice suddenly came from behind him, and it sounded heavy. Haha, so General already knows about our business with the Arabs. Does Great General also believe that we will yield Khorasan and withdraw? Wang Chong faintly smiled, not even turning his head. He had naturally not come to the high walls of Khorasan to admire the grandeur of the Tigris River. There were far too many rivers like this in the Central Plains. Bahram's invitation was the true reason he had appeared here. Of course not, or else I would not have appeared here, Bahram said in somewhat choppy Arabic. Bahram did not speak the language of the Tang dynasty, and Wang Chong did not speak Khorasani. In the end, for the sake of communication, the two had decided to use Arabic. But in the rebel army, everyone has this suspicion. If you retreat, everyone will panic, and this wave of soldiers we gathered with great difficulty will instantly disperse. Moreover, the Arabs will pursue us relentlessly. When the time comes, everyone will suffer grievous losses. Bahram paused for a moment before continuing, a deep concern on his brow. He did not care about the negotiations between the Tang dynasty and the Arabs, nor did he care about the 1 billion taels of gold. From a certain perspective, Bahram even believed that this was a good thing, because only if the Tang dynasty benefited from it would they stay. The Arabs were far too powerful, so powerful that no empire other than the Tang dynasty could contend against them. So many rebel soldiers had been willing to come out this time because they saw hope in the Tang dynasty. Thus, if the Tang dynasty were to withdraw from Khorasan, one could easily imagine the impact it would have on them. This matter will depend on General's prestige to pacify them. The Tang dynasty will not retreat, at least not without reason. Wang Chong faintly smiled. Chapter 1186. Even someone as experienced and knowledgeable as Bahram was momentarily stunned by Wang Chong's words, not understanding where Wang Chong could be so confident. Wang Chong only faintly smiled, his eyes glancing up at the sky with an unfathomable expression. In addition, if Great General is still worried, I can reveal another matter to Great General. I've already mobilized a large number of ballistae and heavy ballistae from the rear, and the Tang dynasty is also sending more soldiers from the capital. The first batch is already on the way. I believe that it will only take a few months at most to reach Khorasan. There is no harm in General telling this matter to the leaders of the rebel army. This will at least dispel some of their doubts and make them believe in the resolve of the Tang dynasty. Wang Chong sternly said. Bahram's expression froze at Wang Chong's words, and then he gave a long sigh. General's words are enough. I will personally go and pacify them. Bahram quickly took his leave. The winds howled over Khorasan, howling like ghosts. Compared to before, the weather was even colder. Other than Wang Chong, no one knew that an unprecedented crisis was silently approaching, one that would be even more ferocious than many people imagined. Heh! Wang Chong faintly smiled and quickly descended the walls. In Khorasan, upon learning that the Tang dynasty was conscripting soldiers, the unease in the hearts of the rebel army quickly faded away. Half a day later, a brief but intense conflict erupted in Shandar, which was across the Tigris River from Khorasan. Cheng Qianli's army had captured Shandar, and after destroying the Arab garrison and several dozen buildings, it had swiftly retreated to Khorasan. This was a demonstration against the Arabs. The Tang dynasty was using this method to express its will. If the Arabs did not agree to the Tang dynasty's conditions, this probing attack would become a complete annihilation. Several days later, when the news reached Baghdad, It unsurprisingly enraged all the Arabs. Bastard! In his own palace, the caliph even accidentally strangled his favorite hunting falcon to death. But even so, Wang Chong's strategy worked. The Arab gold was transported out of Baghdad overnight, carried by more than 1,000 warhorses toward Khorasan. A much softer letter was swiftly sent to Khorasan. But at the same time, the Arabs were mobilizing their soldiers with greater frequency. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers were marching day and night from various Arab war zones to Khorasan. Nearly half of the Arab governors had been driven by the furious caliph to Khorasan. This was an unprecedented march. The Tang dynasty's repeated actions had thoroughly infuriated the supreme ruler of Arabia. The Arab gold arrived much faster than expected. When the thousands of warhorses carrying mountains of gold crossed the Tigris River and were delivered into Khorasan, the army was immediately thrown into a frenzy. On the same day, Cheng Qianli wrote a memorial to the imperial court in the name of Wang Chong and Gao Xianji. 7 or 8 days later, when the news reached the Tang dynasty's capital, it caused a massive uproar. How could this be? The Qixi Protector General and Anxi Protector General actually obtained 1 billion taels of gold from Arabia. Even the Grand Preceptor, who had opposed Wang Chong the most, could no longer sit still upon hearing this news. War had always been a burden on the empire, each time resulting in grievous casualties and the expenditure of the nation's crossbows. But he had never imagined that at the final moments of the war, Wang Chong and the others would repay the imperial court with 1 billion taels of gold. Even the Grand Preceptor, who was never one to show his joy, couldn't help but be dumbstruck. 1 billion taels. And it's in gold. How could this be? Not even 10 years of my Tang dynasty's taxes were this high. Everyone in the Bureau of Revenue, from the minister to the secretary, was stunned by this news. In every war, the Bureau of Revenue was always strapped for cash and racked its brains for a solution. For this reason, of the 6 departments, the Bureau of Revenue was the most opposed to the army. But 1 billion taels of gold? Heavens! This was an astronomical sum. With this sum, the Bureau of Revenue would not need to worry about wars for a very long time. This tiny country is actually this rich? King Qi was also stunned when he heard the news from Khorasan. In his mind, Arabia had always been an insignificant country, not even worth mentioning. Thus, when he heard that Wang Chong and the others had obtained 1 billion taels of gold as reparations, he was dumbstruck. As a member of the imperial family, King Qi had never lacked for money, and he would always throw out large amounts of gold and silver to win over the civil and military officials. But no matter how proud he was of his wealth, he did not have 1 billion taels of gold. In the face of this astronomical sum of treasures, even King Qi paled in comparison, becoming insignificant. In the imperial court, the imperial censors, who had always been the most demanding, were also speechless at this moment. None of them could say a word. Putting aside the matter of the capital, in the distant Khorasan, opening the seal on power requires user to expend 10,000 points of destiny energy. Asking again, does user confirm? In the city of Khorasan, the stone of destiny's voice resounded in Wang Chong's mind. Wang Chong was currently seated cross-legged in an empty room, but in front of him were 5 golden balls of light, displaying the words mind, body, energy, technique, and power. Wang Chong's eyes were fixed on the final ball of light representing power. Force represented luck, terrain, and celestial phenomena. Wang Chong had long ago learned from the Stone of Destiny that the final reward contained luck, terrain, weather, and many other complicated things. The right time, the right place, and the right people were all part of power. This was the ability of the Stone of Destiny's final reward. Whether or not I can take advantage of power will depend on whether the Stone of Destiny's reward is as I imagine it to be. Wang Chong quietly said to himself, "Confirm." With a thought, Wang Chong chose to pay the destiny energy and open the seal on power. Rumble. The moment Wang Chong confirmed, the entire room with Wang Chong at the center began to rumble, and the entire world seemed to tremble. A moment later, the earth rumbled, and in Wang Chong's perception, the entire world began to churn. Everything vanished, and Wang Chong sensed a trembling shadow rapidly expanding. In the blink of an eye, it had transformed into a continent beneath his feet. Bang! An enormous energy exploded in Wang Chong's mind. In a flash, Wang Chong felt like time, space, and everything else had vanished. Even Wang Chong's body had completely vanished, leaving behind only his perception. Beneath him, the shrunken piece of land rapidly expanded, becoming 100 times, 1,000 times, or even 10,000 times its original size. On this undulating piece of land, many things rapidly materialized. A river flowed across the continent, and Wang Chong could even see the spray of water rising and falling. Next to the river, even more changes were taking place. This is Khorasan. Wang Chong immediately recognized it. On the western side of the continent, a small city had sprung up from the ground like bamboo shoots after a spring rain, bordering the river on the side. Wang Chong was already extremely familiar with Khorasan, and Wang Chong saw more and more familiar things. Fluttering banners, many barracks, and many domed buildings the size of ants. If this was Khorasan, then there was no question that the river next to it was the Tigris River. As he traveled west, Wang Chong could see the entire continent. This was the first time Wang Chong had seen the Arabian Empire in this manner, and it gave Wang Chong an extremely strange feeling. I wonder how the Arab soldiers are doing? Wang Chong suddenly thought. A moment later, Wang Chong's eyes began to move westward, surveying Baghdad and the other war zones to the west. As if responding to Wang Chong's thoughts, he could hear the sounds of fighting and the cries of soldiers. On this projection of the continent, Wang Chong could clearly see tens of thousands of warhorses marching from various parts of the Arabian Empire to Khorasan. It was unknown how many soldiers and horses were rushing over day and night. In comparison, the 200,000 soldiers in Khorasan paled in comparison. 700,000, no, at least 800,000 soldiers. Even though Wang Chong had mentally prepared himself and knew that the Caliph would be enraged by his threats, this number still left Wang Chong stunned. Over the course of the Battle of Talas, including the Arab militias they had eliminated, Wang Chong and Gao Xinji had killed nearly 800,000 soldiers. This was a number that any empire would find difficult to endure, and it had even surpassed the total number of soldiers the empire could muster. But even after suffering such a heavy blow, Arabia had still been able to gather 700,000 to 800,000 soldiers. This sort of mobilization ability and reserve of soldiers was enough to make any faction tremble in fear. Even if a significant portion of these soldiers had been recruited militias, it was still an astonishing number. From this, one could see why Arabia was known as the Kingdom of War. This time, the furious Caliph had mobilized almost all of his forces. The 200,000 rebel soldiers in Khorasan would find it very difficult to stop them. But there was no need for Wang Chong to stop them, as he had never thought about using his 200,000 rebel soldiers to fight against all of Arabia. History has already undergone a major change. I hope that that matter will not be affected by this. As this thought flitted through Wang Chong's mind, he raised his head to the sky, but a few moments later, Wang Chong's eyes flashed and he smiled. Although the world had undergone a major change, and not only had he not lost Talas, he had even led an army to Khorasan and pointed his sword at Baghdad, the matter in his memories had not changed in the slightest. The more of you come, the more will die. This time, all of you will pay the heaviest price. With a thought, Wang Chong communicated with the Stone of Destiny's power, reward. Is user certain that he wishes to spend 10,000 points of destiny energy to exchange for it? Yes. Chapter 1188. The Arab soldiers had arrived much faster than expected. In just a few days, Wang Chong's scouts and Khorasani spies had reported that more than 300,000 soldiers had gathered more than 100 kilometers from the Tang dynasty and were rapidly setting up fortifications to guard against any sneak attacks from the Tang dynasty. More and more soldiers were being gathered, and the Arab army was rapidly growing in strength. And from the information they had gathered, the Arabs had gathered at least 2 or 3 imperial great generals. The one who has come is Arabia's empire's white corpse, Hewler. This person has a cruel personality and is extremely patient. More importantly, this person's army is extremely meticulous, and his defenses are practically watertight. If we try to force our way in, we'll find it very difficult to gain the upper hand. Bahram's voice came from next to Wang Chong, who was standing next to him and explaining. Bahram knew all the Arab generals and governors like the back of his hand. In this aspect, the Tang dynasty could not compare. Many of the information that Wang Chong had obtained had actually come from Bahram. Even the tightest defense has its flaws. It all depends on the choice. Wang Chong faintly smiled. The Tang dynasty had won the Battle of Talas with 100,000 against 500,000, and the enemy only had 300,000. Wang Chong had never underestimated any opponent, but even the Arab war god Qutayba had died to his sword, so why would he fear a trifling empire's white corpse? No matter how powerful Hewler was, he could never surpass Qutayba. Bahram froze for a moment, and then he nodded. The empire's white corpse Hewler was no nameless individual. The only person who could speak of Hewler in such a manner in front of him was probably Wang Chong. But Bahram was also well aware that this young commander was completely different from any other person he had ever met. All the incredible opportunities that had happened to him gave him the confidence to say these words in front of everyone. Shui Qianjun, write a letter for me to the Caliph of Arabia. Say that the two sides have already signed an agreement and that Arabia has sent 300,000 soldiers to Khorasan. This makes us feel threatened, a naked betrayal. You have 1 day to withdraw your army from the cities. Otherwise, don't blame us for sending troops to uphold the agreement. Wang Chong replied without turning his head. Hearing Wang Chong's words, Gao Xinji, Cheng Qianli, and everyone else around smiled. The great Tang had long ago seen through all the thoughts and schemes of the Caliph, and there were no secrets to speak of. It was just that the Arabs were still pretending to be deaf and dumb, pretending not to know. Understood. A voice came from behind him, and Shui Qianjun bowed and quickly left. Flap flap. Several carrier pigeons took off into the air, one for Baghdad while the other for the Arab white corpse and the 300,000 Arab soldiers. Boom! The letter from Wang Chong was like a boulder falling to the ground, and the 300,000 soldiers in the Arab camp instantly began to seethe. Bastard! This is intolerable bullying. The empire's white corpse Hewler had always been known for his calm and reserved personality, but when he received Wang Chong's letter, he couldn't help but slam his fist on the table, his eyes spitting fire. The Tang people had already obtained 1 billion taels of gold from the Arabs, and now they were trying to take advantage of the situation by questioning the Arabs. This was simply intolerable bullying. The Arabs had always revered bravery, and it had always been the small and weak countries that had to look up to them. This was the first time they had been so openly threatened. "Milord, what do we do? They've given us 1 day to withdraw from the cities. Do we really have to agree?" A voice suddenly came from the side. It was one of Hewler's escorts, his head lowered and his voice cautious. The Arabs had already gathered an army of 300,000 here, outnumbering the enemy by 100,000. In normal circumstances, they would have been able to ignore them. But everyone knew that more than 100 li away, garrisoned behind the walls of Khorasan, were the 200,000 soldiers of the Tang dynasty and the Khorasani army. Based on their past records, even if they had 100,000 more soldiers, they would not necessarily be able to defeat them. Impossible! The empire's white corpse Hewler's eyes spat fire as he immediately refused. No one can threaten the Arabs like this. Pass on my order to tighten the defenses. I'd like to see just what they can do to us. The adjutant received the order and quickly turned to leave. Wait a moment. Hewler suddenly called out to his deputy. He took in a deep breath, his expression much calmer. Write a letter for me to reply to the Tang dynasty. Arabia has no intention of breaking the agreement with the Tang dynasty. The mobilization of soldiers this time is only a normal mobilization of soldiers and a necessary precaution. I hope that the Tang dynasty will not think too much about it. The deputy was flabbergasted, but he quickly understood, lowered his head, and vanished from the hall. Flap flap. An hour later, an Arabian hunting falcon soared into the sky, leaping over a tributary of the Tigris River and landing in Khorasan. In just 5 minutes, Wang Chong, Gao Xinji, Chengqianli, and Li Sai had all gathered together. After reading the letter, all of them had expressions of interest on their faces. Everyone knew what the Arabs were up to and what plan they were currently carrying out. Lord Protector General, how should we reply to this letter? Shi Yuanqing suddenly broke the silence. Reply. Do we even need to reply? The Arabs don't think that we'll accept such a far-fetched reason, do they? Wang Chong heartily laughed. The Arabs were playing with words. Everyone understood what they were preparing. Since they knew that they were preparing for war, Wang Chong would not be so foolish as to allow them to smoothly assemble their soldiers. Great General Baram, General Cheng, Li Sai, get ready. We are going to meet with the Empire's White Corps Great General. Wang Chong said. Baram, Chengqianli, and the others nodded, a faint smile on their lips. Several hours later, in the city of Shirfan, 100 li from Khorasan, countless Arab soldiers had gathered, their sabers as thick as a forest. The 300,000 soldiers were brimming with killing intent, ready to engage in a large-scale battle at any moment. Be careful. Everyone, get to your positions. Order the craftsmen to work day and night. If they can't build 5,000 new barracks by tomorrow, immediately kill half of them. Hurry and feed the war horses. 5 days from now, we will be fighting with the Tang people. Whip after whip cracked through the air as the Arab generals fiercely lashed the craftsmen and soldiers, urging them to complete the construction of the barracks. Shirfan was not a large city. The 300,000 soldiers had already made the place a little crowded, and there were still another 400,000 to 500,000 soldiers arriving later on. An army of 800,000 required the construction of a large number of facilities. My lord, the construction within the city is almost complete, and the defenses outside are also in the process of being built. We shouldn't have to worry about the Tang people for the time being. A voice came from behind him, coming from an Arab deputy high up on the walls. Hewler nodded in satisfaction and quickly withdrew his gaze. The enemy this time was extremely powerful. Hundreds of thousands of Arab soldiers and great generals like Qutayba had already died at their hands. All of Arabia, including Hewler, was extremely apprehensive of the Tang people, and all of them were acting as if they were facing a powerful foe. Reporting. As he was thinking, an Arab horseman stirred up a cloud of dust in the distance as he galloped toward him. The scout on the horse had a pale face and looked very flustered. There's a large group of soldiers heading towards Shirfan. Boom! Hewler and the other Arab governors grimaced at these words. No one had expected that they would dare to challenge the Arabs when they had the upper hand. Bastard! The agreement has just been signed, and 1 billion taels of gold has already entered their city. The ink hasn't even dried yet. Do you think they would dare to tear up the agreement? Hewler was both shocked and infuriated. No one had ever dared to treat the Arabs like this in previous wars. Moreover, the Tang dynasty had just received 1 billion taels of gold, yet they immediately dared to tear up the treaty and deal with them. This was simply going too far. Report. A few moments later, another shout came from the distance, followed by the galloping of hooves. Another Arab scout had a panicked expression on his face as he galloped toward Shirfan. Sir, we've discovered the allied army of 7,000 Tang people and the insurgents outside the city. They're coming toward us, and they're less than 3 miles away from us. So fast. Hearing this, the expressions of everyone on the city wall changed drastically. The two scouts had only needed a few moments to get within 3 li of Shirfan. At this speed, they would soon reach the walls. Arrogant. Too arrogant. An Arab governor on the walls was enraged. The Tang people of the Eastern world were simply too arrogant. It was just one defeat, and the Arabs still had an enormous army and many governors and generals. Hewler's mind was also seething with rage. Everyone hear my order. Without my order, don't act rashly. I want to see just what this commander of the Tang dynasty wants. With Hewler's order, the atmosphere in Shirfan became somber. A few moments later, a cloud of dust began to rise from the distance, accompanied by the galloping of hooves and fierce neighs. Who goes there? Hewler immediately bellowed from a distance of 600 to 700 meters. His voice was brimming with energy, resounding over the entire Shirfan neighborhood like a peal of thunder. Haha, is that the Arabian Empire's white corpse Hewler on the walls? Chapter 1189. Who are those people below the walls? Is the name of Lord Governor something you can call out? Before Hewler could speak, an Arab general next to him rebuked him. Ah, Hewler, to think that you Arabs would have such a day. I have come this time to pass on a message from the Tang dynasty's Chishi Protector General. Immediately lead all the soldiers and withdraw from Shirfan. Otherwise, the Tang will mobilize their soldiers from Khorasan because of your treachery and attack, just like they did with Qutayba, exterminating all of you. Jalali heartily laughed as he gazed up at the walls. Jalali was a Khorasani and a member of the Sassanid dynasty. For so many years, only the Khorasani who had been oppressed by the Arabs knew what sort of lives they had lived. In front of the Arabs, all the Khorasani had to be careful and grovel, not even daring to speak loudly. They were true second-class citizens, and the Khorasani had to pay enormous taxes. Not too long ago, they had been able to stand before an Arab army of 300,000 and oppose a powerful governor like Hewler. Impudent. Arrogant. On the high walls, Hewler and the other Arab governors and generals were all enraged by these words. A trifling army of 7,000 dared to act so impudently in front of them? They were seeking death. Someone, send me 20,000 men and horses and kill them all. Hewler's face was as cold as ice as he gave the order. With Hewler's order, the city gates opened, and a group of more than 20,000 Arab soldiers surged out, their expressions cold and aloof as they charged at the Arab army outside the city. Ah, let's go. Outside the walls, Jalali saw that his goal had been achieved, and with a wave of his hand, he led his 7,000 soldiers into the distance. The message has been delivered. All of you do your best. Jalali heartily laughed, his voice still coming from up ahead. Where do you think you're going? The Arab general bellowed when he saw that the Arab army was about to leave after taking advantage of the situation, and he immediately led his army forward. The two armies, one in front and one behind, quickly disappeared into the distance. Damn it! Hurry up and charge forward. Don't let them escape. The Tigris River is right in front. They can't escape. Several li away, the Arab general Abra roared and thrust his scimitar into the rear of his horse, causing the entire army to madly charge forward. But before they could get far, Ney suddenly heard a fierce sound of horses. In the next moment, countless soldiers charged, like a sharp arrow, and stabbed into the army behind Abra. Not good. Retreat quickly. Abra's expression changed. He wanted to lead his army to retreat, but it was too late. It's too late to think of escaping now. All of you accept your fate. A loud roar came from the front. Jalali, who had been running away with all his might, suddenly drew his sword and led the 7,000-strong army behind him in a counterattack. Rumble! They charged into the Arab formation. In a flash, the Arabs were in chaos. What? Abra's army was wiped out? On the high walls, Hewler was dumbfounded by the news. In just a few moments, Abra's 20,000 soldiers had been completely wiped out. This had happened far too quickly. How many soldiers did the enemy have? Hewler asked, his entire body in shock and confusion. Besides the 7,000 soldiers from before, the enemy also had more than 8,000 people in the rear, for a total of 15,000 soldiers. What? How could this be? Before Hewler could speak, the two Arab governors standing next to him spoke up, both of them in shock. If the enemy had a much greater number of soldiers, they could accept it, but there were only 15,000 soldiers, not even the soldiers they had dispatched. Just how had they managed to kill so many people in such a short time? Was the legend true? Was this the strongest Eastern army in all of history, even stronger than Qutayba's army? But how could this be? From the information they had gathered, although the Tang dynasty army had won, it only had 20 to 30,000 soldiers left. And from the composition of that army, the enemy was mainly made up of rebel soldiers that were hiding like rats. When had this motley crew become so formidable? Pass on my order. Send out all the hunting falcons. Only now did Hüller sense that something was wrong. He had originally believed that this was just a small group of soldiers harassing and displaying their might, but it now appeared that this was not the case at all. Flap flap. Countless hunting falcons soared into the sky from Shirfan and began to fly off in every direction. A few moments later, the scouting falcons and scouts reported back with accurate numbers of the enemy's forces. 20,000 soldiers was the exact number, and all the Tang people and Khorasani were heading toward Shirfan at full speed. Pass on my order. 100,000 soldiers will follow me out of the city. I want to personally investigate the strength of these people. Hüller was finally infuriated. One mistake was enough. This time, he wanted to personally deal with the Tang people and the remnants of the dynasty. Boom. The gates opened, and a moment later, 100,000 Arab soldiers surged out of the city. 200,000 soldiers stood behind them, ready to give chase at the slightest sign of trouble. Although only 100,000 soldiers had been dispatched, the two armies cooperated with each other and would not give the enemy any opportunities. Rumble. Not long after Hüller led his army out of the city, a massive golden dragon banner rose over the horizon. War drums began to beat as countless soldiers formed from the Tang people, Khorasani, and other rebel soldiers surged toward Shirfan. In the center of this army was an armored black-haired youth who instantly attracted Hüller's attention. It's him! Hüller's pupils constricted at the sight of that young figure, and his entire face paled. He had never imagined that the young commander of the Tang dynasty would personally take action. From Talas until now, Hüller and all the Arab soldiers had heard far too much about this young commander. His appearance, temperament, weapon, and armor were all very detailed. Even if they had never seen him in person, they could immediately recognize him after hearing this description. But this was not why Hüller feared and valued him. More importantly, there was no one in the Arabian Empire who did not know that Qutayba and Ibak had died at his hands. Everyone be careful. This person is probably the youngest commander of the Tang dynasty, Wang Chong. Hüller warily said as he looked forward. Hüller's words made the other two Arab governors, Pahlavi and Karim, say nothing, but their eyes shone with deep apprehension. Gallop. A few moments later, the two armies began to approach each other in a cloud of dust. In the end, they were separated by a short distance. Tang people, you betrayed us. You clearly received the gold we paid, but you still broke the agreement. Truly despicable. The Arab governor of Hamadan, Karim, coldly flashed in his eyes as he charged forward to meet the cavalry. Although his reputation and prestige couldn't compare to Qutayba or Abu Muslim, Kailamu was definitely one of the most powerful governors of the Arabian Empire. Moreover, Kailamu had always had a tough personality, and he showed no fear even in the face of Wang Chong. How could this be considered breaking the agreement? I'm afraid the first to attack will be you guys, not us. A mellow and dignified voice came from the front as Wang Chong slowly rode forward on his white-hoofed shadow. His expression was calm and unruffled, and his every movement exuded a bearing and strength of character that could make other great generals of the same level pale in comparison. Buzz! All the Arab generals grimaced at these words. From start to finish, it had been the Tang people who had been provoking the Arabs, and even at the very end, it had been the Khorasani who had been too impudent. But if one seriously looked into the matter, it truly had been the Arabs who had attacked first. Bastard! It was clearly you who set up an ambush to lure us over. You've been planning this for a very long time. An Arab general next to Hüller finally couldn't help but harshly rebuke him. If we hadn't made sufficient preparations, those 7,000 soldiers would have been completely slaughtered by you. At this moment, Xue Qianjun stepped forward from behind Wang Chong and cursed. You! The Arab general was instantly at a loss for words. Although everyone knew that those 7,000 soldiers had been bait, Xue Qianjun was right. If the Tang dynasty hadn't been one step ahead, the Arab army would have already returned in triumph. There's no need to say any more. Hüller extended an arm and stopped the general behind him. Urging his horse forward, he glared at Wang Chong said, "The Tang people, you are also a famous general of your generation. Is the Tang dynasty this untrustworthy? Wang Chong faintly chuckled as he urged his horse forward, a disdainful look on his face. Trustworthy or untrustworthy, honoring the agreement or breaking it, that's not up to you to decide. Didn't I already tell you? Within 1 day, you must withdraw from Shirfan. Since you won't abide by it, you will naturally be the first to break the agreement. Don't blame me for leading my army west and attacking. You! Hewler paled at these words. As the most powerful empire in the West, when had it been forced into such a state? I'll count to 3. I'll give you 3 seconds. If you don't withdraw by then, prepare to die. Wang Chong extended a finger, his entire body exuding a domineering aura. 1, 2, 3. Before Hewler could react, Wang Chong extended a third finger, and a moment later, the 20,000-some Tang, Khorassani, and other rebel soldiers roared and charged forward. Hewler's eyes lit up, and Wang Chong's eyes flickered as he raised his third finger. Domineering. Too domineering. Chapter 1190. Kaio! Kaio! Battle cries rang out as the army of 20,000 surged forward like a raging river, forming a vast torrent of steel that charged at the other side. This is absurd. Even though Hewler was known as the Empire's white corpse, his pale face devoid of emotion, he was so angry that his blood began to boil. No matter how formidable the enemy was, they were only 20,000 soldiers, all of them made of flesh and blood. Could they really fight 100 against 100,000? Moreover, even if they left, Shirfan was not far behind them, and there were still 200,000 soldiers inside. Kill them! Hewler's face was as cold as ice as he unsheathed his sword and gave the order to attack. Bang! The earth quaked as the 100,000 Arab soldiers roared and charged at the Tang people, Khorassani, and other rebel soldiers. Boom! The two armies, 20,000 against 100,000, fiercely clashed, causing the earth to quake in shock. But this battle was destined to have nothing to do with the intensity that Hewler had imagined. As the two armies collided like behemoths, Ney and the Tang dynasty's flanks drew long arcs across the battlefield, stabbing into the Arab army from the left and right. Meanwhile, a group of cavalry from the center of the army of 20,000 charged out like a sharp sword, piercing through the Arab ranks. Cutting formation. The moment they charged into the enemy ranks, the several thousand Wushang cavalry scattered like blossoms, transforming into countless sharp blades that cut through the enemy's ranks. In the blink of an eye, the 100,000 Arab soldiers had collapsed into chaos, and all of this had taken place in just a few seconds. Bastard! Kill them! The Empire's white corpse Hewler was infuriated by this sight. For any army, the collapse of the main force would be fatal. Although the enemy was fierce, they were far from invincible. In terms of numbers, the Arabs still had the advantage, and they still had 200,000 soldiers in the cities in the rear, ready to charge out at any moment. But just when Hewler was still holding out hope, clang. In the time it took for a spark to fly off a piece of flint, there was the sound of metal clanging. Before anyone could react, an invisible energy spread out, and something that shocked and even horrified everyone happened. Clang, clang, clang. The halos around the 100,000 soldiers rapidly weakened, and their auras continued to drop at an alarming rate. What's going on? What the hell happened? Why has my strength dropped so much? Be careful, that the entire battlefield was thrown into chaos. This sudden development had dealt a far greater blow to the Arab army than the Wushang cavalry's cutting formation. The former was a physical slaughter, while the latter was a psychological panic that caught people off guard. And this was only the beginning. A moment later, there was another clattering of metal, and this time, it was the Arab general's turn to plummet in strength. A burst of chaotic screams came from behind them. Everyone turned their heads, only to find that the chaotic screams were coming from Shirfan City, which was far behind them. In a flash, Hewler and all the other governors and great generals grimaced. No one had expected the enemy's attack range to be so large. Not just the 100,000 soldiers at the front, but the 200,000 soldiers in the rear who were not participating in the battle were also affected. The bane of the battlefield halo. The bane of generals halo. Wang Chong, riding atop his white-hoofed shadow, smiled and unleashed his two strongest war halos. Unlike the top-class armies and elites led by Qutayba and Osman, the Arab soldiers were far less elite, and they were much more affected by the effects of the fog. The bane of the battlefield halo and the bane of generals halo had never been invincible. As long as an expert of the great general level took action and expended energy, they could still weaken the effects of these halos. But would Wang Chong give them such a chance? Hurry! Use the great general halo to weaken these two halos. Pahlavi bellowed in both shock and fury. Although he didn't know what sort of halo his foe was using, he was still a governor of Arabia, a great general expert. Pahlavi was able to quickly determine how to deal with it. However, before he could finish his words, the earth rumbled. In an instant, everyone felt an enormous aura suddenly rise up from the ground like a tsunami, heading toward the three of them at an astonishing speed. Since you won't retreat, then you will remain here forever. Wang Chong's voice, suffused with a bone-chilling chill, resounded through the world like the god of death announcing their fates. Impudent! The three of them looked up at the sky at the same time, but before Hewler could react, the Arab governor to his right, Kailamo, furiously leaped into the air. Clang clang clang. As he flew into the air, black and red halos exploded from his body. Kailamo, watch out! Hewler grimaced at this sight. Of all the Arab governors, Karim had never been the most patient. His hot-tempered personality had become a fatal danger at this moment. No one knew better than him that this Eastern youth was far more valiant than any of the imperial great generals of the conquered countries they had encountered before. This was not something that Karim could deal with alone. Bang! With no time to think, Hewler's body exploded with energy and shot into the sky like a cannonball. The moment he soared into the sky, a demonic roar resounded through the world. Behind Hewler, the air rippled, and a ghastly white foot suddenly emerged from the depths of the void, followed by a pale white figure stepping out of the void. As everyone watched, a ghastly white corpse more than 30 meters tall appeared behind Hewler. Upon seeing this corpse, everyone suddenly understood why Hewler was called the Empire's White Corpse. The moment it appeared, the eyes of the giant pale corpse suddenly shot out two balls of light that were like scorching suns. At the same time, it let out a bloodthirsty and brutal howl. The howl contained a strong spiritual fluctuation that shot out in all directions. In a flash, fear appeared in the eyes of all the surrounding people. This was an instinctive fear, like ants encountering a more powerful life form. Trembling, they began to flee, not even the Arabs able to avoid it. As the Arab governor, the Empire's White Corpse Hewler's style of battle was completely different from that of the other governors. The giant corpse that Hewler had summoned possessed powerful psychic energy, and the howl of fear it let out was enough to make even Saint Martial experts tremble and feel a deep dread in their souls. But before the Empire's White Corpse Hewler could let out a howl of fear, a moment later, boom! A vast and terrifying energy that caused even the world to lose its splendor suddenly erupted and struck the giant pale corpse. The giant corpse trembled and then grabbed his head with both hands as if he had been struck by a heavy blow. His energy had also fallen into disarray. Not only that, the two suns of light in the giant corpse's eyes rapidly dimmed and dimmed. The Empire's White Corpse Hewler groaned, blood flowing out of his ears, nostrils, and eyes. That avatar was not just an avatar, but his life. An injury to the avatar was no different from an injury to him. Psychic energy. A hint of fear finally appeared in Hewler's eyes. His hell-white corpse had always been an extremely powerful psychic energy technique. Not even Saint Martial experts could withstand it, much less others. But Hewler had never imagined that his opponent's psychic energy was even stronger than his own. Ahem! At almost the same time, he heard a series of groans. Hewler was far from the only one affected by Wang Chong's psychic energy attack. To the left and right, Pahlavi and Karim were both assaulted, their psychic energy thrown into disarray. Even their techniques were affected by this psychic attack, causing them to clearly stagnate. Psychic storm. This was an evolved technique that Wang Chong had comprehended from Maslow's Thorn of Darkness. The Thorn of Darkness was a technique that could be used against a single opponent, but Wang Chong had evolved it into a psychic energy technique that could be used against multiple opponents. Even against multiple Saint Martial experts, it could still deal a massive blow to their minds and souls, throwing them into disarray. Great destruction art. A cold and emotionless voice resounded in the ears of all the Arabs. Before they could react, Wang Chong had used the strongest technique of the great yin-yang heaven creation art. Not good. Careful. The moment Wang Chong attacked, everyone felt an enormous fear, but it was too late. Boom, boom, boom. In the blink of an eye, a huge airflow whizzed down from the sky and violently hit the ground. In the sky, there was a loud noise, and several figures were sent flying like kites with their strings cut. Hewler's face was covered in fear as he fled. If one looked carefully, one of his arms was limp at his side, blood gushing out of it. Hewler had actually been injured in a single blow. A destructive energy was wreaking havoc in his body, and in just a few moments, Hewler had tried several dozen times to expel a strand of this energy, but he had failed every time. Impossible. Just what kind of energy could be so terrifying? Hewler's heart thumped in fear. He had originally believed that no matter how powerful his opponent was, he would only be on the same level as Abu Muslim, but not even Abu Muslim could defeat him like this. But before Hewler could get very far, he heard a shrill wail. Before Hewler could react, an enormous aura vanished from his senses. Pahlavi. Hewler's heart sank as a thought flitted through his mind. I said long ago that you were seeking death. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.